Welcome to our first annual hydrogen conference in San Juan County. But it's really a little bit more like welcome to having a distinct and fantastic conversation about what it is that we can do to improve our economy, both in San Juan County and across the state of New Mexico.
I'm here on behalf of Dr. Tony Hopper Pendergrass, the president of San Juan College. She right now is observing some long-planned and much-needed time away from the college. So she offers her apologies for not being here to welcome you herself. She would much rather be welcoming you rather than having me earnestly do so. I want to recognize you and welcome you with a token of our appreciation for your support in launching our Center of Excellence.
Which is fantastic, by the way.
For the leadership you have demonstrated through some extremely difficult times the past year and 3 or 4 months. I know it wasn't easy. We all know it wasn't easy. I'm glad I didn't have to do what you did. You've done a marvelous job for us. And as a token of our appreciation, the college offers you this pot. Please, no jokes about the recent legislation. This pot was crafted by a San Juan College faculty member, Don Ellis, who is a world-renowned ceramist. People covet and envy his ceramics around the world. We want you to have this. Now be careful, it's a little bit heavy.
Wow, it's incredible.
And with that, I'll stop because it doesn't get any better than Don Ellis's pot. And there's a box with some wrapping, and it's that somebody will wrap this up, probably Alicia. She's an art handler as well as a dean, and she'll wrap this up so that you can get it safely back to Santa Fe. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Glad
That's
you're
so
here.
nice. Nice. Am I up now?
You're up.
Okay, all right. Of course. Well, Edward, thank you so very much. This pot will get a much-deserved, beautiful spot and a permanent home in the governor's residence, which of course belongs to all of us. And for those of you who haven't been, please come. We've been not available as many of our local businesses and even being with our extended families, and it feels incredibly good to open the residence and to have folks come. And I can't wait to highlight this beautiful art piece and add it to a collection of frankly incredible artists from all across the country, the state, frankly the world. So thank you very much, it's incredible. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. So I'm really delighted for a couple of reasons. One, anybody that makes a little fun of my good friend Jason Sandel is a good friend of mine. So I'm going to keep working that out. And I'm looking around the room. I want to make sure I recognize, do we have President Velarde here? There you are. Welcome, President Velarde. No stranger, the Jicarilla Apache Nation, to strong energy investments, to strong economic efforts. And for this community in particular, we know that they're invested in not just projects around what we know as the Jicarilla Apache Nation, but frankly, around the state and around the United States and globe. So we're delighted to have you here. And I think it speaks volumes about the partnerships that are available. And then is Vice President Weiser here?
He's en route, Governor.
He's en route, okay. He's attending, same issue. We want these kinds of extended partnerships. And I'm delighted. And do we have Representative Tom Taylor? I don't see anyone. When he gets here, feel free, Edward, to make fun of him too.
Thank you.
He spent years of his legislative career making sure that he did that to me, and it was well placed, and I deserved every bit of it. I also want to recognize a brand new regent to the University of New Mexico, Regent Fortner. Thank you very much for serving. I really appreciate you. And then this, I hope, feels like a good sign about what we're doing here today. I think I have half of the cabinet in the room today. I'm trying to think it would be easier to introduce who's not here. And so I'm going to go quickly. We have Secretary Trujillo from the Indian Affairs Department. Sarah Cottrell-Props from the Energy and Minerals Department. Keys from the Economic Development Department. Kenney from the Environment Department. That's important. It's important because we want this effort, hydrogen, as an energy opportunity, not just for San Juan County and the communities in this county and the region. We want to be a national and international leader in hydrogen energy. That means every person, every company, every educational opportunity, all of it. And in order to do that, state government's got to do three things. One, we have to believe in it as much as you do. Otherwise, we're a barrier. We don't want to be a barrier. So any permitting, any of those issues, all have to be removed by us. We need to know what they are. We need to know, even if it's not real, sometimes companies don't know us, far away, perceive there's an issue. We make it clear there won't be an issue. Two, we have to make sure that the environmental issues, which as we're looking at energy reliance, clean environmental standards across the country, that we're completely aligned about not only how effective hydrogen is in that effort, and how critical it is, not just in the transition, but it is both economically, and we're going to need it in every sector, including transportation, if this country and the globe is going to do what it needs to do in a brand new energy investment environment. Three, the federal government has made it very clear, right, that they want to be leading and they want states to step up and to be recognized as hydrogen leaders. Four, we're going to spend money laying the groundwork and doing studies. So we can't do that in a vacuum. We have to have you. We need every business leader. We need every political leader. We need everyone with an interest to assist us in getting an effective plan. Why do we need that plan? If I don't have the plan, I'm not in a position with the federal government to be really clear. We are not going to let California and Oregon get anywhere close to this. We're going to beat them fair and square. All right, and the more we do, that's the whole purpose of this effort today. The more we do, the more we get done, the more commitments we have, the better cooperation we engage in, the clearer our path becomes to being the regional hub. And as this community knows better than any, that we sort of teeter-totter. There's been a paradigm shift, and every time, whether it's a political shift, a clear environmental required movement, a shift in the White House, a shift in the legislature, energy communities often get caught in that environment in a way that's not productive. Very limited, completely narrow, no options for the community. And even in the Energy Transition Act, we were clear that with this antiquated generating station, we're going to have real issues protecting people's jobs. You don't protect people's jobs, you're not protecting their families. You don't protect their families, you're abandoning whole communities. We're not going to do that. That's why there's 40 million making its way here. But that should not be the thing we rely on. What we should be doing is exactly this. And you have Bayotech, Libertad, you've got the gas company of New Mexico, you've got incredible partners that are already, frankly, I think, invested in your success. So here's what I need from you today. I need you in this meeting to be really clear that this is something we believe New Mexico can not only benefit from, but we can be recognized again as world leaders in this effort. Two, you have huge momentum. And don't think that you don't because you do. And three, that the federal government has already reached out and is very interested in what's going on today. And four, you should expect us to have this as a priority going into the 30-day session. So whatever tools are missing, they get squarely appropriated, identified that there's a pathway. And that pathway leads straight to San Juan County. So I'm really excited. I hope that shows. I'm delighted to be here. I'm very impressed. Thank you, Mr. Sandel, and so many other partners for making what I think will be the beginning of a very successful future for all of us. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Okay. So we are super excited about the conversation that's going to happen today. It's about how we can all work together to drive economic development in the state of New Mexico and for San Juan County. And that's really all about working together, not only as a state, but also with our tribal nations and our partners across the state and across their lands. And with that, I would very much like to recognize President Velarde of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. President, thank you very much for being here today. It is an outstanding privilege of mine. Are there some words that you would like to say this morning? Thank you very much, President. President Velarde of the Jicarilla Apache Nation.
Morning. Say hello in our language. But to mention my name, that's my name. But I just like to introduce myself. I'm there with the Congratulations President. I've been in office almost a year, and there's a lot of things going on, and I think the landscape has changed from what it used to be, just oil and gas, but now alternative energy. Oil and gas activity is slowing down. I'm glad this is something else coming before us. Also, what the oil and gas did over the years, polluting our air. Now we're trying to change it. So I'm glad to hear that we like to be part of it too. So I'm interested. We're all interested in this project. Hopefully we be involved until we get some road there. So also at the same time we have we're involved in solar energy also. That's kind of a new thing to us too, but we're proceeding on that also, and I think we're Albuquerque wants to buy our first energy that we produce. So I'm glad it's all lined up that way. So it's the benefit the people. So I'm glad about that too, and being here with all you people here, I think you're experts and things like that. So I think the movement is good. It's great. I'm glad we're part of it. But before I end, I forgot to introduce my people. I have a councilman, Venezuela back there. He's right. It's our authority. For our state lobbyist is Robert. Also, before I end, I'd like to thank the governor for keeping us safe at Jicarilla. So I appreciate what you guys did, the Department of Health. Of course, we all, I think everybody lost families, friends, and stuff to this COVID, but we're still there. So thank the state for it. So thank you very much.
Vice President Eliza, thank you very much for being here this morning. Appreciate you very much. Are there words that you would like to say as a welcome to our group? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so thank you very much for being here. Vice President Eliza of the Navajo Nation.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Got here, but Vice President Myron here. Do apologize for being late, sometimes, things like that. And they didn't tell me that Governor Grisham would be here, so I heard that she's meeting with President at 1 p.m., so otherwise I would have left quicker. My apologies, my sincere apologies, but good morning, everybody. I'm the Vice President, Comanche Nishlet, 1200 Buses team. Out of Comanche Nation, so I am half Comanche, half Navajo, so that makes me a commando. Commando for energy development, in this case hydrogen. So I appreciate all your esteemed cast of professionals and engineers and people that are going to take us into the next dimension, right, of energy development, and that renewable green energy. And so we appreciate all of the leadership that is here today. Looking forward to learning more. We do have, where's Mr. McKay right here? Mr. McKay, our CEO of Navigation Oil and Gas. So we are pushing the envelope, at least from the Navajo Nation's representation here. And, it is a new thrust, so to speak. And even though hydrogen, I mean, there's been many that have touted it for years and years, and now the urgent, very urgent need to pursue this. It is one of many aspects of the Navajo Nation's pursuit of renewable energy here on Navajo. And we do have solar, right? We're pushing forward with many projects here, large projects, utility scale projects, but also at that, we want to try to expedite the exploration of hydrogen and the harnessing of it. And today, we're all gathered here today to look at the many new techniques, what research has shown, brought to the table, so to speak. And we want to be, per President Jonathan Nez's and myself's Hayok proclamation, we want to help lead Indian country, and you know what, at that, maybe not only Indian country, but the world in energy, in renewable pursuit. There's hydrogen, there's helium, and there's wind, and then there's hydro. And so we want to push the envelope here, and I think this pandemic has certainly elevated the urgent need to be all that we can be with regard to this, and so we appreciate it. And you know what, being a businessman, I know that all of those advancements and all of our successes are going to be tied up in collaboration with many partners. And so for that, we are here today, and we're going to grasp what we can, the low-hanging fruit, the proverbial low-hanging fruit. But there's so much more to garner here, and appreciate the leadership that's here. The highest office in the land of New Mexico, Michelle Grisham, thank you for your leadership, and all those that are gathered here today. So President Jonathan Nez sends his best, and he'll be convening in a meeting with him shortly here this afternoon. I'll be taking another meeting in Flagstaff here later today as well. But you know what? We're all about the same thing. This pandemic has hurt us so much. It's hurt the Navajo Nation extremely hard. And so everything that this pandemic has taken away, we want to be about replacing and then enhancing. And so I think we are all gathered here to see what we can garner, what can we advocate for at the highest levels, and then what are those low-hanging fruit measures that can be taken out here. So thank you for your expertise in this, and the San Juan School of Energy, Arvin Trujillo, partner we're working on to bring a railroad to northwest New Mexico. We have garnered a $2 million bill grant, which is this month being enacted, and start drilling down on that, what feasibility and route planning will look like. So again, all hands on deck mentality. And so as Vice President, we definitely are thankful that we're here, part of this here, and I may have to leave a little bit early, but that's not good right now because I came late and leave early. So please forgive us. So with that, I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And we're looking forward to being a sponge here along with you all. So God bless you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we have all assembled here today to learn from each other. And in my pursuit of the conversation about economic development on behalf of our community, which is an absolute passion of mine, I learned very, very quickly that there was tremendous opportunity in hydrogen. And each of you are either here to learn or here to teach for the next 2.5 hours. And that is a tremendous opportunity that we have inside of this room today. And I very much appreciate each of you coming to this room and to this meeting for this very important discussion. Because what I learned in my pursuit of economic development on behalf of our community, on behalf of a community that, quite frankly, since October 10th of 2008 has suffered. We have suffered inside of this community. With people leaving, jobs going away, we need a new opportunity. And the conversation that we're having today and the support that we can receive from the federal government, from the state government, from our tribal governments, from the relationships that we can build is a new day for us. And so many people ask me, why are we doing a roundtable? Why are we having a conversation? It's like, come on, no big deal. It really is about bringing people together such that we can identify what those opportunities are and capitalize on them quickly. Because getting to the market quickest is what is going to revitalize not only San Juan County, but the state of New Mexico. So that is our purpose today, is for each of you, whether it be as somebody that is a student or somebody that is a teacher, to come forward in a group in an effort to identify what our opportunities are, such that we can truly revitalize the community. And I will, my gratitude is so huge for each of you for being here today. But most importantly, the people of this community, the people of San Juan County, the people of New Mexico depend upon us being successful. So thank you all for being here. Our first presentation is from Bayotech. And I believe that we have Stewart here from Bayotech. Let me check.
This idea.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Mr. Stewart from Bayotech. We appreciate you being here.
Everybody, excited to be here. Looking around the room on behalf of Bayotech, I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Stewart. Thank you. Loading something up here for us. Looking around the room, I feel like we recognize at least about half of you here, and by the end of today, look forward to working with all of you if possible, from our state secretaries, the governor, our good friends at the Navajo Nation, New Mexico Oil and Gas, Libertad, Escalante, the folks that you're partnered with across the state. You're super excited for the hydrogen future here and to make this a reality and help make New Mexico the hydrogen hub, not just for the Southwest and Indian country, but also across the United States. At the end of the day, we believe this is truly a mission that is here and ready to go today, not in the future. This isn't about 2030 or 2050. This is something we can launch today. So Bayotech, our goal, our mission is to make hydrogen easy. We are a company that makes on-site hydrogen generation for distributed production of hydrogen wherever it is needed. And now with an acquisition we've addressed or announced last week, we have the capability of storing and distributing high-pressure hydrogen anywhere that it's needed, so that it can be used locally in any of your applications or any of your businesses or any of your communities that want to do that. To me, this is a particularly important mission as I drive a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle. So it is very personal. It is our only family vehicle. So when there are shortages in the supply chain or interruptions to the world of hydrogen, we feel it uniquely. So for me, this is a personal goal to make sure that hydrogen is successful, broadly available, inexpensive, and made from renewable resources or low carbon resources. Okay. Also, as the son of a Texas oil man who also has a degree in environmental management from a forestry school, it is also personally gratifying to me today to be here with you all in the center of oil and gas and coal country again today and talk about an opportunity to transition these jobs and these communities to the energy future that awaits us. Because I really do believe New Mexico and these communities can be an integral and key part of the energy revolution and transition that's happening now. So Jason asked me to step back and maybe sort of, for those of you who are old hands at hydrogen, this will be no news to you, but just to spend a few minutes here, I'm going to sort of divide my presentation here into 3 sections. The first is to sort of give a quick overview of hydrogen. Why hydrogen now? What's going on? Why is it important to us? Why is it such a key part of the conversation in the energy industry today? Then we're going to spend a few minutes talking about Bayotech, what we do and our role in sort of the hydrogen story. And then finally, sort of our vision for how we can get there to make hydrogen sort of New Mexico the hydrogen hub of the US. Okay. So I believe we are at a moment in our history now when we sort of move from the transition from the carbon age to what we'll call the hydrogen age. Hydrogen today is a market that produces about 70 million metric tons of hydrogen around the world today that is sold for around $150 billion of value. That is projected to grow in just through the end of the decade by much, potentially as much as 50%. In the next 2 decades after that, perhaps grow as much as 5 times that, up to a market that ultimately is worth more than $1 trillion total. So capturing opportunities like that, bringing them to the state here, super important for economic growth and transitioning to the future. But where's that kind of growth going to come from, and why do we think all this growth is there? So traditionally, hydrogen is used and produced in a couple specific large industries. Refining, hydrogen is used in the refining industries and oil and gas production, used in ammonia production, key to get to all of our nitrogen-related fertilizers and urea, the value chain for the fertilizer side of things, and finally ethanol production. So those are the big industrial users today. Where all the growth is coming from is the emerging uses: heavy-duty transportation, passenger vehicle transportation, power generation, industrial decarbonization. These are the things that will catapult the market and make it grow at these rates that we're talking about. So why do we think hydrogen can do these things? Why is it the center of conversation? Why do we expect this growth out of it? This is just one piece of the story. You will hear from a lot of folks today to talk about for power generation or other uses today. I'm going to let them cover that. I'm going to cover a bit of the transportation bit and why we care about it for transportation. The key for hydrogen and the value that we get is that 1 kilogram of hydrogen equates to about the same amount of energy that you'll find in 1 gallon of diesel or gasoline for powering a vehicle. Similar amount of energy. We talk about hydrogen, by the way, in vehicles in terms of kilograms, because that's how many we put in our tank. That's how we measure it by weight. The advantage of that energy, though, is that when you put it into a fuel cell that electrochemically converts it back into power, you leverage the 2 to 3 times greater efficiency of a fuel cell versus an internal combustion engine. The result of that, then, is zero emission transportation or mobility that comes with a far greater advantage in how many miles you can travel. So on the same amount of energy, you go approximately 70 miles per kilogram of hydrogen versus call it 24 to 30 miles on your gasoline or diesel. Okay, and all that comes with water as the only byproduct, because whether it's used in a fuel cell or whether hydrogen is combusted as a traditional fuel, the byproduct from that combustion is only water. Hydrogen, oxygen together, water. No other products of combustion or use in a fuel cell. Okay, so that's why people are excited about it today. One thing to focus on, there's sort of this presumption out there in the world that hydrogen has to come from electrolysis and only from wind and solar, and that is the only way to get to low carbon hydrogen. That's just not true. So here I'm focusing specifically on 1 million BTUs of energy content, and what will that get you if you put it into different vehicles from different sources. Okay. So on the left-hand side, we start out, or let's start with the middle column, sorry, the gas column there. If you take a passenger vehicle and you put 1 million BTUs of gasoline into that car, you would get about 200 miles of range from it. And per mile, it would emit, I can't read those numbers, sorry. 430 grams of CO2 equivalent emissions would come out of that vehicle from that 1 million BTUs of fuel. We can improve the environmental footprint of that by using natural gas and a natural gas combustion engine. So you'll see these another clean fuel bus, you know, at the airport or something like that, with CNG vehicles, right? That's because they're lower emission, less particulates, less NOx, other things like that versus gasoline and diesel. But there's also the improvement in carbon footprint. So per mile with a CNG vehicle, you get about 390 grams of CO2 equivalent coming out of a CNG vehicle. On the other hand, if you took that same amount of energy as natural gas, converted that into hydrogen, even with the losses associated with that conversion, and you put that into a fuel cell electric vehicle, you now go 255 miles and have a 45 to 50% reduction in the amount of CO2 per mile you get out of that. And this is based on hydrogen straight from the natural gas pipeline. This is not doing anything special with heat. This is using today's fossil resources. We can affordably get to a 45 to 50% reduction in carbon emissions from the transportation sector strictly by using the resources available to us today at low cost through natural gas. Okay. We can even take that all the way down to zero or even go negative by using biogas resources to produce that hydrogen, such as would be available from the state's landfills, wastewater treatment plants, or anaerobic digestion of community waste from agricultural communities like the North. Okay, so that was the first part of the story, approximately 5 minutes. In the last 5 minutes, we could have fueled my vehicle, got it out of the gas station, set off on the road for 396 miles of zero emissions range. That's how fast we can fuel these vehicles. You don't have to sit around for hours. You don't have to black out a city grid trying to get the power into them. All this is available today. That, by the way, is an IGX trailer. That is something that we make at Bayotech. That is filling my vehicle directly. So you can have remote hydrogen delivered to vehicles wherever they need it. Okay, so the hydrogen story for the industry overall. I mentioned before that the majority of hydrogen was made for very large industries, methanol, refining, ammonia production. That leaves very little production for all these growing uses, okay? Only 5% of the world's hydrogen today is produced for these emerging uses. So we have a supply-demand problem. All the supply goes to those giant industries. Unfortunately, industrial scale production is not very well suited to end uses that are distributed across the world. Industrial scale hydrogen is made in a handful, probably a dozen or so large scale plants that produce $1 billion or more of investment in them that make this hydrogen centrally. They take something that is inexpensive to generate, less than $3 a kilogram to generate or produce, and then they have to transport that over long distances using liquefaction of it or high pressure gasification of it, compression, and bring that to market. By the time it gets to at the end market, if it's gaseous, it's probably costing about $10 to $14 a kilogram to produce and get to you to purchase it. Or if it's liquefied, which is energy intensive and bad for the carbon emissions standpoint, but is more efficient for transportation purposes, it probably costs about $8 to $10. Okay, so we took something that was inexpensive, and because it was made far away, it becomes very expensive to get to. What Bayotech does then is have a method of producing hydrogen economically and energy efficiently at a local small scale. We do this with a technology that originally came out of Sandia National Labs, where we can basically use all of the heat generated in the process in a very efficient way so that we don't overproduce energy or heat. We don't have steam that we have to export. This is all done in a compact footprint of about 52 feet by 20 foot wide. Okay? For that, we can produce 1 ton of hydrogen per day from about 200 MMBTUs of natural gas from any source, or methane from any source. We also make these high pressure transports and storage vessels now through our partnership with IGX, the acquisition we made and announced. So we can bring that hydrogen wherever you need it from any of our hubs that we use in the state. And finally, we are even producing some hydrogen fuel cell appliances, such as hydrogen fuel cell power light towers and power generators. So you can replace diesel generators, for example, using hydrogen to do that in power plant. That's an example of what our hydrogen generators look like. This is our 200 kilogram a day unit that we operate at our Center of Excellence in Albuquerque. And a rendering of what it could look like if deployed at a fueling station side by side. That's the footprint I was talking about, just to give you an idea of what's under that skin, the components that go into that, but it is a compact one. It can be expanded basically, and we can do this on a modular basis and grow with you as you need. So the key thing about what Bayotech can do now is deliver hydrogen to you for your first few uses. And then as your use grows over time, the end use applications that matter, we can scale up and eventually do on-site production at your site. How does this all translate to cost? If we are using low-cost gas inputs, this is a cross curve showing you the cost of hydrogen production using a Bayotech unit based on the input cost of the methane source. So if we're talking about pipeline gas, you're over on the left-hand side of the chart, you're producing hydrogen for about $3 a kilogram or less. If we're delivering that to you, and there's the additional expenses of compression and distribution to do that, you're talking about $2 more even methane. Okay. You can imagine the leverage that comes from, for example, converting flare gas and low-cost resources and how we might use those to make low-cost hydrogen available to everybody. From a sustainability factor or side of things, there's a couple things that we do to make this much more sustainable. One, the energy efficiency that I referenced to you before. We don't have waste heat. We don't have waste steam. We basically preheat use our waste heat to preheat the methane coming into our process so that basically there's less combustion in our steam methane reformers. That makes us highly energy efficient. Additionally, we avoid that liquefaction for moving hydrogen over long distances because our goal is to produce the hydrogen as close to the point of use as possible, right? That way we improve the environmental footprint associated with it. Finally, there's the two levers I mentioned. One is using sustainable feedstocks from renewable natural gas sources. That would again be those anaerobic digesters taking advantage of dairy manure or other sources in the state from ag waste, wastewater treatment plants that exist in every urban community across the country today. Or leveraging landfill gas, for example. We have biomethane available from landfills. Finally, carbon capture. People like to talk about carbon capture as though it is science fiction. Carbon capture is being developed and focused on for very large natural gas power plants or coal-fired power plants, right? It turns out all those technologies have had modular scale units that they have used to test and develop pilot scale plants for them. Those pilot scale technologies actually are a really good fit with our modular SMR. The market just never anticipated that there would be a reason to capture 9 to 10 tons of CO2 a day. It turns out that is very well suited to our modular hydrogen. And we spent about the last year working on a number of partnerships to find 3 different ways to capture CO2 and to make either liquid CO2, gaseous CO2, or mineralized CO2 as a solid product. So we were working on 3 different partnerships to do that. We announced the very first one just a few weeks ago with Carbon Clean Solutions that would be our provider of technology for making gaseous CO2 available for things like against oil recovery. So just a few things, our transportation and our storage and our hydrogen appliances, I'll just show you what that looks like to give you a sense that these things are real. They're not just cartoons, they're out there in the world that we're doing it today. Here you see our high pressure gas transport modules. Those transport up to 850 kilograms of hydrogen from the point of generation to the point of use if necessary. So if you've got a remote gas station, for example, that you want to do, we can load that up with up to 850 kilograms, bring that out, load that in, fill up a service station with that. We also have things that are tow behind pickup trucks. So I actually hope to drive my Nexo soon from California to New Mexico and bring it by bringing my own hydrogen and a tow behind, just to give you an example of what I can do. We're also developing a compression and dispensing skid. That's the thing down at the bottom right, which would basically allow anyone to take a small amount of hydrogen and have hydrogen fueling on site without a large financial commitment. A hydrogen refueling station would generally run you about $1 million to $2 million to build out a full permanent station. This can be leased from us for a few $1,000s. We're doing this today, filling vehicles, powering backup power for cell phone towers across the country, Customs and Border Patrol monitoring equipment on the bottom right, filling or getting hydrogen to provide ground side or port side power to a parked marine vessel. So those are all applications that IGX and Bayotech are delivering hydrogen to today. Finally, this is sort of the range of appliances I was talking about of trying to stimulate how we can use hydrogen at different places that hydrogen is useful today. You see the light tower on the bottom left, for example. That has in it a 1 kilowatt fuel cell that could basically operate on hydrogen for 54 hours. That is silent, emission free, can turn on demand and be available within seconds to you. You can imagine the use for that. We've deployed those, for example, at national parks and sensitive environments. You can imagine what that would do, for example, for the construction industry or monitoring places that are worried about sound. But it's also true power generation. The other units that you see at the top left there is a hydrogen fuel cell powered power generator. So anything that we need to plug in to get electric power, you can plug it into that. That is a 5 kilowatt generating unit that with about 16 kilograms of hydrogen would also last for 50, 60 hours on a full 5 kilowatt load. All right, so in the last 10 minutes now, we could fuel a bus. Buses take between 20 and 40 kilograms of hydrogen. That bus would now be taking off on its journeys around the state. So we could use that to replace local municipal transit or the intercity bus travel, for example, that connects the national labs, Santa Fe, Los Alamos, and Albuquerque. So wrapping up, the hydrogen story for New Mexico and Indian country, and how can we become a hub of hydrogen development for the nation? Okay. First of all, Bayotech is a New Mexico-based company. We were founded in 2016, based on commercializing our technology that originally came out of Sandia National Labs. We have since raised $157 million at the start of this year and look to go public and be $1 billion company by early next year. Okay. All this based on hydrogen, folks. We are a hydrogen pure play. We do nothing else. Our manufacturing partner is Pesco. John Myron here is well represent Pesco as well. Pesco's facility for us gives us the manufacturing base that we need to expand quickly. At Bayotech, we manufacture and perfect the first of a kind units, and then we hand over the designs to Pesco to manufacture those in bulk for us. That is also very important for growing the jobs base up here in San Juan County. As you can imagine, these are folks with traditional oil and gas trades, pipe fitters, welders, electricians. All of these trades are things that translate well to the hydrogen economy and to rollout of our hydrogen generation units and ultimately to fuel cell power and mobility applications. Okay. Our goal, therefore, is to help grow in the home state, so I'm not just doing things in California, I'm doing it here as well. How do we get to that vision? New Mexico has a set of abundant resources that make it excellent and well suited to being a hydrogen hub. Okay. First of all, we have abundant access to natural resources from natural gas and methane sources, wind and solar for electrolysis. We have agriculture and dairy operations in the state that can be used as sources of biomethane, not to mention the government sources of biomethane that I mentioned before. We have the expertise of the national labs, the colleges and universities like we're right here with commitment to hydrogen at San Juan College, where we are developing, by the way, I guess that comes up on the next page, I won't steal it under yet. And finally, forward-thinking utility in New Mexico gas company, who we are very eager about our partnership with to do a lot of things, exploring the frontiers of what a natural gas utility can look like and how hydrogen fits into that infrastructure for decarbonization purposes. Finally, we have some very key and important resources for carbon capture. The map you see at the top is very fine. Sorry, you all will have access to this later. It is unique formations across the United States that are good for carbon capture and sequestering carbon. There are a number of formations appropriate for that in New Mexico. It can be used both for long-term storage of CO2 as well as sub-ground storage of hydrogen, because we need inexpensive places to store large volumes of hydrogen, for example, if you're ever going to use it in generating power at large scale. Okay. Finally, we have critical infrastructure pipelines across the state, both that can be repurposed from the natural gas side to either carry hydrogen blends or to actually deliver hydrogen to markets like California. And finally, pipelines that are used for EOR and carbon capture today. We have CO2 pipelines running across the state currently, taking CO2 for tertiary oil development, flooding fields with CO2 and using it in that application. So those are all things available to us. There's a unique overlap of resources that I can tell you as I tell the story across the United States. This is not available in those places in this abundance. Okay. Finally, strategic location. You see on the bottom right, for example, the plan of Nikola, the trucking company, and where they plan on rolling out their hydrogen stations and having 700 of them by 2028. Our juxtaposition on the 25 and the 40 and access to the major transportation corridors of the Southwest is a really excellent thing for purposes of bringing the hydrogen economy here and leveraging what we can do in the state. So what does this mean for New Mexico? First of all, revenue opportunities. We can take all of those wastes and biomethane sources along with oil and gas resources and methane from the state and convert those into hydrogen. That is a revenue multiplier, folks. The hydrogen is much more valuable than the natural gas or methane feedstock sources that we use. So 5 tons of hydrogen would be worth $25,000 to $50,000. If you scale that up, that is an enormous opportunity for wealth creation within the state to take advantage of your various sources of methane that we can leverage to do that. Manufacturing jobs for Farmington, we've talked about that. Pesco suggests that it could be as many as 100 to 400 jobs if we hit our ambitions of targets of how we can grow at Bayotech. The state has been very committed to this. I think you all are aware of the Clean Fuel Standard Act, which is normally important for growing the hydrogen market next year. The Energy Transition Act that has been key in driving jobs to cleaner economy from traditional oil and gas and coal areas. And finally, the ozone precursor rule is not to be ignored. New Mexico is the first state that we are aware of to include fuel cells and hydrogen production as means for controlling methane emissions from oil and gas production. That is huge. Thank you all very much for that. If we can take that basically and leverage that into applying that hydrogen into uses out in the oil and gas patch, that is also enormously important. Think of the diesel displacement that we can do if we take flare gas, a wasted resource and an emission source, and make that into hydrogen and put that into diesel generators, power generators, and equipment out in the oil and gas patch. That is an enormous improvement in carbon footprint from what is a wasted resource and efficient source today. Okay, so finally, what are we doing in the state right now today? This is not, again, just a 2030, 2050 initiative. This is something that Bayotech is doing today. So we are committed, and this is the first public announcement of it, to put a hydrogen hub in New Mexico in Albuquerque, operating on a 24/7 basis, producing 1 ton of hydrogen per day in Albuquerque. Okay, we want to do that to seed the hydrogen industry in the state, make hydrogen available to all of you and anybody who wants to start using hydrogen for hydrogen applications. This will be online and available first quarter of next year in Albuquerque. We're also working with Navajo Nation Oil and Gas, Big Navajo Energy, and East Indian Country to bring hydrogen development from stranded resources on the Navajo Nation. That is a key project for us as well up here in San Juan County in the northern part of the state. We want that hydrogen to be available for driving municipal transit opportunities, for driving heavy duty transit opportunities, for driving these fuel cell applications that we're talking about. Okay. Finally, we have our partnership with New Mexico Gas. This is one that we announced last year. There's about a 6-point plan there from everything from hydrogen blending, carbon sequestration. I don't want to steal their thunder, but New Mexico Gas, I can credit them with being one of the most forward-thinking utilities that we have encountered around the world, as far as looking at what the future of a natural gas utility should look like and how we should spread that model across the world. So that is inordinately important because that is a large-scale hydrogen production that could go into very large natural gas infrastructure and decarbonize part of the energy economy that is hard to get to. Last but not least, our partnership with San Juan College. We just recently announced a partnership here to develop a curriculum at the School of Energy that will be focused on hydrogen production, maintaining, producing, taking care of all this infrastructure, included in that both hydrogen production and fuel cells. So that will be launching soon. We're going. So final takeaways. We can deploy low carbon hydrogen today at cost parity with diesel. People talk about maybe by 2030, 2050, we'll get to $5 hydrogen. We have $5 hydrogen and it is low carbon. It doesn't have to wait. We're doing it now. Okay? Our solution can include agriculture, oil and gas, and coal communities and cities by using these different sources of methane that we talked about earlier. And finally, we do believe that New Mexico can be the hydrogen hub of the United States. So thank you all for that. I will say in the total of this 15 minutes, as you would have guessed, we could have fueled a heavy duty 18-wheeler with up to 60 kilograms of hydrogen that could be setting out on a 500 or 600 mile range in order to deliver zero emission transportation for all of our heavy goods sector. So thank you all for your time. Available to everybody.
So the next presentation that we're going to have is we're going to talk a little bit about the competition that the state of New Mexico has. Because at the end of the day, when there are large funds available to states from the federal government and others, there's a bit of a space race that's going on, or a race to draw down those funds. And so today we have Andrew Browning with Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative that's here to talk to us about what other states are doing to draw down these funds and the competition that we're in to accomplish our goals of being a hydrogen hub quickly. So with that, help me welcome Andrew Browning, please.
Thanks so much. First of all, I'd like to just thank Jason and the organizers of this conference, San Juan College, Mr. Corbell, for inviting me. Western States and Tribal Nations is our organization. It's a really unique organization. It is a collaborative effort between state governments, county governments, and tribal governments to find natural gas markets for stranded gas. Our basins that are represented are the San Juan Basin, Uinta Basin, the Piceance Basin, and the Green River Basin in Wyoming. Huge amounts of natural gas that have not been able to find their natural markets for about a generation. So we're looking at various ways that we're looking at LNG exports, but increasingly looking at blue hydrogen, the concept of blue hydrogen, and the opportunities that Mr. Bach give us. Our main themes are really kind of predicated, and we're focused on rural economic development. We're focused on upholding tribal self-determination. and realizing environmental benefits through natural gas production and hydrogen for natural gas, or natural gas for hydrogen. Okay. Go ahead. Jason Sandel is our chair. Our membership is an important part of who we are. We are an organization that is led by the states. The state of New Mexico through the EMNRD, state of Utah, the state of Wyoming, the Indian tribe, the western Colorado counties of Garfield, Mesa, Moffett, and Rio Blanco, the state of Baja California, Mexico, which is important in terms of export potential. Blackhawk Energy is a member. The Jicarilla Nation is not a member, but we would love for them to be a member. We're talking with Mike Davis about starting those conversations. The Southern Ute tribe has just passed a resolution to join our efforts. The piece right there with the logos was a letter that our organization sent to the Energy Secretary of Mexico to talk about the Energía Costensual project that could potentially use New Mexico gas. Actually, the first phase is using San Juan gas in support of their 20-year export permits. And I think this is indicative of kind of the power of our organization and the states kind of leading on these resource development issues on natural gas, on hydrogen. So in pursuit, it is, the advantages we bring to LNG exports are really advantages that we bring for hydrogen. We have ample supply. There are 11.5 BCF a day of natural gas produced in the Rockies basins. We have pipeline bonding authority, which I'll get to in a little bit, but the state of New Mexico, the state of Utah, the state of Wyoming all have bonding authority specifically for energy development and transportation. The Wyoming Energy Authority, we'll talk about kind of your competition here in just a second. The Wyoming Energy Authority has bonding authority, very explicitly says, $3 billion for infrastructure within or outside of the state. Existing pipeline network, and we think that's an important factor, that, blue hydrogen is the comparative advantage of going to blue hydrogen and green hydrogen as we start to make technology, the technical and economic advancements. But you have a ready network here of natural gas lines that could supply that hydrogen. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at in that regard in just a second. And then, the reduced geopolitical risk. And I'll talk a little bit about the potential for hydrogen export. That the Asian nations, particularly Japan, are really leading the effort on transforming their economies to a hydrogen economy. Countries like Australia are investing tens of billions of dollars to become a hydrogen exporter. So it's not just New Mexico as a state competing with other states. The United States is competing with other nations as they are transforming to the hydrogen economy, to be a net hydrogen kind of technology provider and hydrogen provider. So we're, the Western states are, just all of them, especially Wyoming and New Mexico, have huge hydrogen potential. With blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen, natural gas, where the carbon is captured and sequestered. We have geology that's very conducive towards that. Obviously, ample solar and wind resources. And then kind of proximity to markets. California they have been advancing towards hydrogen significantly. I'll talk a little bit about this Utah project that's going to be providing them hydrogen. But we have significant proximity both to the Southern California hydrogen markets, market demand, Northern California market demand, and then port export capacity to, the potential port export capacity to countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, countries that are reliant on imported energy imported LNG are looking at how they utilize that network and transform themselves into hydrogen economies. So what are our members doing? There are a number of energy firms, including Dominion and Sempra, who are our members. Sempra just walked in, that are looking at hydrogen right now. These are important players. These are energy companies with billions of dollars of market cap. Sempra's SoCal gas utility, which supplies gas to 22 million customers, is working on pilot programs to test the fuel and see how a blend with natural gas affects the pipes as well as appliances and other equipment. Dominion is testing, Dominion's now Berkshire Hathaway is testing a 5% blend at pilot facilities in Utah and North Carolina. And these are just kind of examples. But I think, you know, the companies are really committing brains and talent and money to better understanding, you know, the technical and economic challenges towards getting to a hydrogen economy. The pipeline transport issue is a real issue. It's kind of like the ethanol blend with gasoline. At some point, it starts to impact the equipment via pipes, et cetera. And so there's major money and resources being spent to exploring, you know, how we overcome that. What can we develop to address those issues? I know specifically the New Mexico labs are addressing those issues and have a pretty significant program trying to resolve those problems. And then, as I stated before, the Western states, you know, are all looking to become hydrogen hubs as well. And I'm just going to give an example here of some, you know, what some of the states are doing. I would say, you know, from my viewpoint, New Mexico, under your leadership, you know, you have the technology companies, you have companies like Libertad, you have the labs, you have the political will, which was pretty huge, I think, to plant the flag and develop New Mexico as a hydrogen economy. Our organization, I don't know if I mentioned Jason Sandel is the chair of Western States and Tribal Nations. I may have just skipped that part. So Jason has been an important driver in terms of the thought process and how we're shaping our strategy on this. We feel just with the construct of our organization, we want to be leaders on it. But within our membership, I have a great viewpoint to see what the other states are doing, and they're not sitting on their hands. Wyoming especially is also kind of setting the table to become a leading hydrogen player. Their potential hydrogen resources among the best in the nation. The prospect of their natural gas hub of Powell supplying blue hydrogen to the Northern California networks is something that they're pursuing. They just issued a RFI on the creation of a blue hydrogen or green hydrogen project along with carbon capture and sequestration. And they've let me know that there's a long list of RFPs that they're going to be issuing in this regard. They have committed significant dollars to the university. The University of Wyoming has formed itself a hydrogen energy research center with pretty significant funding that's going to look at all the types of energy produced in coal, natural gas, solar, wind, and its hydrogen potential. Utah also, they have steel in the ground. They are transforming. There's a project in Delta, Utah called the Intermountain Power Project. And this has been something that has been ongoing for a while. That is looking, it is an 1,800 megawatt coal-fired power generation plant that is at this point transforming itself into a natural gas-fired power generation plant, but with a 30% hydrogen mix. This is something that has been in the works for a long time. They're going to look at the salt domes around the Delta, Utah as storage for hydrogen. Is becoming essentially a hydrogen a renewable energy storage project. And they already have lines out to Southern California. I know the state of California is a huge actor in hydrogen. And the LA Water and Power Department, especially, is very interested in investing significant capital and resources into hydrogen. So there are 35 different project participants, and this is up and underway. There are a number of other states that are involved in, as I said, kind of setting the table for hydrogen economy to attract federal dollars. The Bush administration, the Biden administration has proposed 15 different pilot projects within its infrastructure bill at one point. Senator Manchin has a hydrogen bill, hydrogen components of his energy bill that call for 2 pilot projects with carbon capture, 4 different CCS projects. And I know different states, including the state of New Mexico, would like to have one of those pilot projects here. Senator Heinrich, who we've talked to, is quite conversant, very passionate about these issues, and very plugged in clearly to the Department of Energy. I think our goal is to try to land our first goal is to try to increase the number of projects, because 2 is not that many. But overall, we'd like to capture one of those from our states. New Mexico certainly has set the table for itself as laying the groundwork for, that's an attractive place to land one of those hydrogen projects. I wanted to get to Japan here. And, Japan is an important actor here. And I wanted to highlight that because Japan essentially made the global LNG industry what it is today in the 1970s. They created the supply chains, networks, and infrastructure capable of importing large amounts of liquid natural gas. I think they're still larger than China just in terms of LNG consumed. If not, they're not far behind. But they are kind of a key maker in this world, and they are rapidly moving to hydrogen. They have a 0% net carbon goal by 2050. Hydrogen is a huge part of that. And JERA, JERA is a federation of utilities in Japan that purchase LNG, and they're looking at another hydrogen kind of carriers, ammonia, NH3. A lot of companies, a lot of countries are looking at that as a potential hydrogen carrier. It's much easier to transport hydrogen in kind of liquid form. You can introduce ammonia directly into coal-fired power generation up to 20%. So there's huge potential there as well. And as for ourselves, we want, as I stated before, we want to be leaders on this effort. The infrastructure issue, you have companies like Libertad, like Bayotech that are resolving the carbon technology and all the technical issues and technology issues surrounded with that. But one of the things that we want to tackle is how do we get it there? How do we get it to California markets? How do we get it to export facilities headed towards Mexico? Specifically, right now they're moving dirt on Energía Costa Azul, which we're hoping will take San Juan gas, Neon's gas, and Green River gas. But we have prepared an RFP. We're kind of at the last stages. We're going to issue it, and we're going to explore what is needed in terms of what are existing gaps and what needs to happen technically with the pipelines currently in service to be able to deliver kind of a dual approach of natural gas and hydrogen. We also need to explore the state farming authority where we can kind of combine those, bundle those, if you will, to make that happen. There's not a whole lot of precedence here. We're looking at maybe some stuff that's done the New York Port Authority, New Jersey Port Authority, but this is something that would be a very kind of powerful tool to jumpstart development of the Western states hydrogen economy. The resources are here, the technology is being developed, and I think the Western states are really trying to position to become leaders and suppliers of hydrogen energy to the rest of the country. I just wanted to lay out kind of the pipeline map. So for me, it's always good to visual. You can see, the pipes coming out of the San Juan into Southern California, into the export facilities here. And so we're looking at where the gaps are and what needs to be done technically in order to realize natural gas hydrogen for our Western state. And this is something. There are mechanisms, and I won't go into this too deeply, but we have the Western Governors Association already has a policy and political framework. I'll focus on objective number 6: create functional partnerships with states, federal agencies, tribal governments, and local jurisdictions to solve conflicts that hinder energy infrastructure and resource development. This is one of the great opportunities of our time. I think our kids are going to realize it, and I'm glad to be here speaking to you all as we're starting to launch this effort. Thanks so much.
Before I proceed, I definitely want to recognize that Navajo Nation Council Delegate Eugenia Charles Newton has joined us this morning, and I just wanted to acknowledge you and thank you very much. Charles Newton, very much. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next presentation that we have, and the presenter is Sabina Russell from Zen Energy Solutions. But we have a friend that I grew up with that's going to provide an introduction. And so please help me welcome Angela from Gas Company, or New Mexico Gas Company, who's going to provide an introduction for Sabina Russell. Angela.
Thank you. Well, I'm Angela Serrano de Rivera. I currently wear 2 hats at New Mexico Gas. I am the Director of Engineering and Technical Services and the Director of Strategy and Project Development. And as Stewart had said, New Mexico Gas is very interested in enhancing opportunities for hydrogen in New Mexico. And part of our support, we've hired a hydrogen expert, Zen Clean Energy Solutions, who are helping us to develop opportunities not only for New Mexico Gas, but for New Mexico as a whole. And Sabina Russell, who is joining us from Canada today, will be reviewing those opportunities with us. Sabina is a principal and the co-founder of Zen Clean Energy Solutions. It's a Vancouver-based company, and she has over 23 years of experience in all aspects of the hydrogen value chain. So I'll turn it over to Sabina. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for that introduction, Angela and Jason. I'm happy to be joining you here today. As Angela said, I'm calling in from Vancouver, British Columbia. I just want to point out, you may have heard in the news that about a week and a half ago, we had a crazy heat wave up here in Canada, in BC. And one of our small towns, Lytton, BC, for 3 days in a row broke the hottest temperature record in Canada ever. And that's very rare for BC, a very moderate climate. By the 3rd day, we were up around 50 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And you may have heard there was a fire in that town, and it pretty much burned to the ground after those 3 crazy hot days. And it just, for me, really emphasizes why we're here, why we need to go faster, and we need to decarbonize our energy systems. And I really believe hydrogen is going to play a very important role in that. So Zen specializes in hydrogen and fuel cells. We've been around for about 5.5 years. A lot of the work we do is helping governments and industry develop strategies and look at how they can transform energy systems and the role hydrogen will play. So as Angela said, we've been working with New Mexico Gas Company. We've done work in Canada and the US at the federal and provincial state level to develop policy papers as well. But the work we do developing strategies is very informed by on the ground experience, actually developing and managing projects. So I've been developing fuel cells for almost 25 years now. But at Zen, we develop projects throughout the whole hydrogen value chain, from working with transit agencies to develop electrolyzers for producing fuel on site for fuel cell buses. We've worked on port projects, blending with natural gas. So we understand the technology and what it takes to get it out there. And our last pillar of business is fleet transition planning, especially in California. People are talking about the market in California, where they have a ZEV mandate for light duty, the ICT regulation for transit to be fully zero emission, ACT for trucks. That's causing a huge amount of effort in California to figure out battery versus fuel cell. Each will play a role. What's the best fit for different routes? And so we do a lot of work in California on that side of things as well. So that's a bit about who we are. Just on the strategy piece, I just wanted to point out that Zen was the lead author for the federal government of Canada in developing the hydrogen strategy for Canada. That was released in December of 2020, and it really sets the vision at the federal level for Canada to play a major role in this new hydrogen economy. And a key piece of that strategy is, how do we get a domestic market really established quickly in Canada? And there's this hydrogen hub strategy that is our focus here, which I think you are talking about in the San Juan area as well. We think it makes a lot of sense. And I want to share some of our learnings around that today, and some of the opportunities we think you have in New Mexico. So maybe just a quick note about the global sector and what's happening. I think Stewart kind of showed this already in a different view, but if you look today at how hydrogen is made, most of it is what we would call gray hydrogen. It's made from reforming natural gas, where there is no carbon capture and sequestration. So there are carbon emissions to produce that hydrogen. And when you look at where it's used in these big industries like oil and gas refining, ammonia production for fertilizer. It's used for heat generation. And then there's a very, very small wedge, that green wedge, that's sort of these new emerging applications, like using it in fuel cell electric vehicles for zero emission transportation. But what we're seeing is there's a rapid transition where that is really taking over the sector. And what's driving that, and we do really believe we're at an inflection point now. Like, the number of announcements every week are truly astounding on major projects under development. And part of that is, low cost renewables and the way the costs have come down, and hydrogen is seen as a great combination with intermittent renewables for large scale energy storage. Obviously, technology is rapidly emerging, from new modular SMR technology to the end use applications as well. And then just globally, this recognition around the urgent need to decarbonize our energy systems. And as countries and regions are looking at, what does net zero really mean? Like, how do we get to that end state? We recognize direct electrification, biofuels will play a huge role, but there's hard to abate, very energy intensive applications where hydrogen really offers some advantages. And so when you look at all of that together, the forecast for, what role hydrogen will play ultimately, it varies from, I think in the US, they say up to 18% of all delivered energy will be in the form of hydrogen. Globally, 24%. Canada says 30%. Whatever that number is, it's a very large portion of the ultimate energy mix. And the value of the sector is estimated at around 11.7 trillion by 2050. So we need hydrogen to meet decarbonization goals, and there's a great opportunity to play a role in the sector and gain economically from it. So this is a bit probably hard to see on your screen, but I just want to really emphasize that we have to always remember, yes, it's important to have economic growth and the jobs that come out of it, but what should be guiding our decisions technically on how to make the hydrogen and use it should always come back to emissions reduction. And so when you look at New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, and where your emissions are, sort of this inner wheel shows the major sectors. And so obviously oil and gas is a very large emitter from a sector point of view in the state. And then you've also got transportation, electricity generation, the built environment, and you can see how those break down further into how the energy is used and where the emissions come from. And what I would say is hydrogen can play a very important role in those really difficult to abate sectors, the ones where we can't see a real path forward with batteries or direct electrification. I think hydrogen really can offer a solution for the oil and gas sector to play a role in a net zero future. And it can be used in other industry as well that's energy intensive, like the heat for cement production, mining vehicles that rely very heavily on diesel and just can't haul the goods with heavy batteries on board, heavy duty transportation like trucks and buses, heating for the built environment, and power generation as well. And when we talk about power generation, we're really talking about that dispatchable power through turbines or fuel cell systems that supplement the intermittent renewables that are rapidly gaining traction. So I think this has been covered at a high level, but hydrogen is very versatile, and you can make it in a bunch of different ways and use it in a bunch of very different ways. So on the production side of things, the two major pathways are electrolysis using clean or renewable power. And there was actually a recent study done by NREL that shows of all the states, New Mexico ranks #2 in terms of hydrogen production potential from that green electrolytic pathway. And I think the estimate is somewhere around 350 million tons a year of production potential. So that's very significant, a very strategic advantage for the state. And then, when we're looking up in the San Juan Basin area, especially, we look at what we call the blue pathway, where you take natural gas, CH4, and you reform it and split the carbon from the hydrogen. We believe it is very important to have carbon capture and sequestration right at the point of extraction be an important piece of that pathway. And you have a lot of the resources to be able to capture and sequester that carbon as well in the region. So really strategically positioned in terms of your hydrogen production potential relative to other states. I think we've talked about pieces of how hydrogen can be used, but I just wanted to show it here sort of all in one place that, when hydrogen is produced, it can be used directly as a fuel in fuel cell electric vehicles. As Stewart said, fuel cell vehicles, when you electrochemically convert hydrogen to the electricity in a vehicle, you get a 2 to 3 times improvement in the efficiency versus if you combust it, it's about the same efficiency. So the ultimate vision in transportation is fuel cells. There are technologies like co-combustion that are being used as an intermediate pathway that result in emissions reduction, but don't have that efficiency gain. Hydrogen can also be used as a fuel directly in fuel cells for stationary power generation as well. You can burn hydrogen, and when you burn hydrogen, there's no carbon attached to it, so you don't get CO2 emissions where you're burning it. You just get water vapor. And so where you need high-grade heat in industry or in the built environment, hydrogen either directly burned or as a blend with natural gas can really help to decarbonize those areas as well. And then lastly, hydrogen is used as a feedstock today. That's where most hydrogen is used. We talked about oil and gas upgrading. Also fertilizer production, more and more for green steel production. And looking forward, there's also an emerging sector looking at capturing CO2, for example, from flue gases and combining it with renewable hydrogen to make something called liquid synthetic fuels. So we would lump that into the feedstock category. So, when we were looking at New Mexico and saying, where do we think you have a need for hydrogen and a strategic advantage, we kind of identified 3 main areas, and I'll go through each of them quickly. Excuse me. So first of all, transportation, especially heavy duty. I love this map that shows the major transportation corridors through the US. I brushed over it very quickly, but in California, started with the light duty vehicle mandate, then transit buses, and now heavy duty trucks. And that's called the ACT regulation. And those trucks move from the coast across the US, and they move many of them through New Mexico. So there's that opportunity to provide fueling for these zero emission vehicles that are mandated to be zero emission. They're going to need to fuel somewhere, and stopping for 6 or 8 hours to charge a battery on a Class 8 truck is not going to be the answer. It will be hydrogen. So New Mexico could provide fuel and fueling stations for those vehicles, but also in state, when you look at your own emissions and how to get to net zero, around 14% of your emissions are from transportation, and a large portion of that are from heavy duty trucks. And I drive an EXO as well, which is a fuel cell electric light duty vehicle. They will be out there and they will play an important role, but there's a bigger advantage in these heavier trucks for hydrogen over batteries. So we think there'll be a larger market share there. So in terms of, how do you make that happen? I know you've got some government officials in the room today, and government's going to play a very important role in setting that stage for the policy measures that will drive adoption in transportation. The low carbon fuel regulation that you're working on already is a very positive step forward and will really help. And then also, frankly, ZEV mandates. So just setting timeframes by which all new vehicles purchased have to be zero emission, and that's battery or fuel cell. Those are the two types for both light duty and heavy duty, will really signal activity and make sure that there's vehicles available in the region as well. Another major opportunity we see for New Mexico is what we call power to gas. And that's where renewable power is used to electrolyze water and make hydrogen. And that hydrogen really can be very effective for that long duration, large scale energy storage. And so we think that there's a great role for hydrogen there, and you can use local geological assets like salt caverns, like depleted wells to store the hydrogen cost effectively. And then when you just look macro scale at your energy system, I know there's a big effort on more direct electrification, but today somewhere between 15 to 20% of all your energy needs are delivered in the form of electrons. And so when you look at going from today, 2021 to 2050 and saying zero emissions, to think you can capture the other 80% of refined petroleum products, natural gas, all those other ways of delivering energy to the end use just through wires, it's not feasible. So you will need low carbon fuels like RNG, like hydrogen as part of that mix. And so tying together the energy systems of, your gas system and your electric utility systems will give you energy resiliency, and it'll give you a path to get that energy out there to where it's needed. Again, the low carbon fuels. In terms of policy measures for this side of things, we think, like in BC, we have actually a low carbon fuel target. So we have 15% renewable gas in our natural gas grid by 2030 is required, and hydrogen is making up a big portion of that. So setting those firm targets linked to a time frame will help drive that. It'll help drive sort of the offtake and supply at the same time, which is really needed. And then utilities can play a very important role here. They bring low cost capital, they bring know-how, they bring skills. So allowing the utilities to actually play a role in that production and distribution of hydrogen will also accelerate adoption in this sector. And then industry as well. So New Mexico has a wide range of industries in the state that could benefit from hydrogen adoption. We talked a little bit about the oil and gas sector, and frankly, a lot of traditional energy companies are facing a very uncertain future right now, and they need to figure out how they can play a role in a net zero future. And hydrogen really offers an opportunity for these oil and gas companies to, right at the point of extraction, convert to hydrogen, sequester the carbon, and provide a low carbon fuel. A lot of your industry also relies on diesel. So we think, sectors like mining will also benefit from hydrogen use. You also have refineries and cement that can be large offtake early on for hydrogen. So what we found to be effective in other parts of the world for driving adoption in industry is setting specific emissions reduction targets by industrial sector. So people have something they're working towards. Also providing funding and support for front-end engineering design studies, because for a steel plant or a mine to convert to hydrogen, they have to do a lot of upfront work to really understand the technical viability, what the costs are, who to partner with. And so helping that first phase move along is really critical. And workforce training for a lot of these traditional industrial sectors will also be key to successful deployment of hydrogen. So I wanted to share with you an example from Canada, because as you know, Alberta, you may or may not know, Alberta is a very oil and gas rich province for us, facing a lot of similar challenges like economic downturn, the cost of oil was very low. It's rebounding now. But they have really, in the last 6 months, embraced hydrogen as this is where we can play a role going forward. We can still make transportation fuels, and it's going to be hydrogen. And so they, have looked at this hub strategy. And if you look over on the right, when I talk about a hub, it really has to be the whole value chain at scale together in a concentrated geographic region. So you can't just say, oh, we're going to be the producers of hydrogen, but we're not going to use it here ourselves. You have to figure out how to make it, move it around, provide fueling infrastructure, and use it all in that region and get the scale needed to get the economics in place. So Edmonton's been doing that. Their hub is really built around what we would call blue hydrogen. So making hydrogen through steam methane reformation, or ATR, and very focused on carbon capture and sequestration. There's already a hydrogen pipeline in the province, and they're building out that pipeline, and also recently announced investment in building out CO2 pipelines so that the captured carbon can be, brought for enhanced oil recovery and also use in other products. And then very importantly too, is the way they're rolling out end use applications is amalgamating different end use applications anchored by industry. So oil and gas upgrading, when you refine petroleum or fossil fuels to make gasoline and diesel, you need hydrogen. It's being dirty hydrogen where the CO2 is just released. So the first thing they're doing is saying, we're going to use cleaner hydrogen to lower the carbon intensity of conventional fuels. That creates scale. And then we have offtake in newer applications like fuel cell vehicles and heavy duty trucks is a big focus. And ultimately, that's going to attract new industries to the region. So we're already seeing fertilizer production coming there because the low-cost hydrogen is available. And I just wanted to add that, these are the real projects in that region. And I wanted to highlight, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, these are new projects that have been announced that have attracted massive capital to the region. And big energy players. So Suncor Oil and Gas Company, ATCO is a natural gas utility in the province. They're working together to build a big production plant. Air Products Industrial Gas Company investing $1.3 billion in Alberta to produce hydrogen and liquefy it and move it around. And then, as I mentioned, we have 2 pipeline companies working together to build out the CO2 pipeline grid that supports this blue hydrogen production. And then over on the right, just some real examples of where the offtake is going to be and who the players are. And I just wanted to show this as an example, as a region that's maybe just a little bit ahead, but I think you're catching up quickly. And, in terms of San Juan and what the opportunities are, we just see a lot of parallels. And this is a little bit of a busy slide, but we think you have all the elements there to really produce a hydrogen hub and do it quickly and at scale. And those are the 2 key ingredients. You have to move quickly and you have to do it at scale. So you've got obviously the low cost natural gas in the region. You have the potential to reform that into hydrogen and sequester the, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but sequester the CO2. From those plants, you can have hydrogen either delivered through pipeline or through gaseous delivery trucks or liquefaction. Pipelines are the lowest cost way if you can sort of use existing pipelines or justify building of new ones. And then it's going to be really important to have these multiple end uses for hydrogen in the region. We think power production in your region makes a lot of sense. So blending hydrogen with natural gas in some of your existing power plants. And then trucking in the region is also another key area of offtake. And then working with natural gas utilities, probably the biggest load immediately for hydrogen can be blending it into your existing natural gas pipelines. We know it's safe to do it in the range of 5 to 15% without any upgrades to the pipelines or the end use appliances. That creates a big load and it decarbonizes heating in the region immediately. Longer term, we see sort of the centralized production being joined by a more distributed production, either these distributed SMR plants or electrolysis plants that tap into the renewable electricity in the region. And then San Juan can start to produce hydrogen and export it to other parts of the state that will be big demand centers. So it's just a bit of a vision for what the path forward might look like. And then finally, just, for some key takeaways, we really believe that New Mexico has the potential to be a leader in the sector. a very key part will be to set that vision at the state level early on and show the support for hydrogen and other low carbon fuels, and really figure about what that end state needs to be from a sort of a net zero energy system. San Juan itself has a lot of the key attributes to be an early hub for the state. We think blue hydrogen production is what really makes sense there, leveraging your low cost natural gas. It's really important to figure out how to capture and sequester that carbon right off the bat. And then it's going to be critical to recognize you have to use hydrogen in the region as well. So you've got to figure out how to get fleets of vehicles there, how to blend it with natural gas. And then ultimately, by taking these actions, we see really great potential that this development of a hydrogen economy will bring. So first of all, very importantly, decarbonizing your energy systems and improving air quality. Economic growth, like transitioning people in traditional jobs into this hydrogen economy, new job creation. And then with California, your very close neighbor and so much demand there, creating this export potential for the state, and really giving that future for the existing oil and gas companies to transition and be part of that clean energy future. And then ultimately too, when you look at your own energy systems, we really need resiliency. I think we've seen it with, storms creating outages, with rolling brownouts in California. We have to have multiple sources of energy in this low carbon future. And so we think pipelines as well as electric lines are going to be needed, and hydrogen is the lowest carbon fuel to play a part in that. So thank you so much, and happy to take any questions or take them later, whatever you think, Jason.
This presentation was fantastic. It very clearly identifies exactly about the opportunities that we have inside of the community. So Sabina, Angela, thank you all very much. With that, then we're going to go ahead and move forward and have a presentation from Libertad Power and Dan Klein. And we just very much appreciate, Dan, you taking the time to be here today and making the effort to make the travels to be here. So thank you very, very much. With that, Dan Klein with Libertad Power.
Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you all for your good morning endurance here. I'm Dan Klein. My middle name is Edward.
So digging at me.
I'm one of the partners in the Libertad Power Project. I have two of my other partners here, Joe Molino and Tim McQueen. And there are 6 of us that are partners in the Libertad Power Project. I moved to New Mexico in 2012. And before that, for a few decades, I was an energy and environmental policy analyst in the Washington, D.C. area, working for a range of clients across government, NGO, and industry community. And so I'm more than willing to talk about Libertad's activities in developing hydrogen here in New Mexico. Most of my comments today are speaking as a policy one on the urgency of jumpstarting a hydrogen economy here. I'll summarize my argument at the outset. It's simple. In a deeply decarbonized economy, the hydrogen opportunity is huge. You have my comment? Yeah, hydrogen opportunity is huge. Second, New Mexico is extremely well positioned for hydrogen economy, perhaps uniquely so. And third is, these things don't happen by themselves. In order to make most of this opportunity, there's some key action steps that need to be taken, and soon, by state and industry. Some of the things I'm going to say you've heard before. I'll try and be brief on that. But we'll just point out that there's nothing I'm saying here that I think is inconsistent with what we've heard before. This last question, why hydrogen? And I don't think it's widely understood or even appreciated, but today, the United States has actually reduced its carbon emissions far more than any other country ever. Not really appreciated though. From our peak year of 2005 until last year, 2020, CO2 emissions fell 24%. That's over 1.4 billion tons. Most of this was in the electric power sector, where emissions fell 40%, over 900 million, primarily due to natural gas and that's quite a few. No other country has actually reduced emissions by as much as 2. We're talking big numbers. But if we want to go to deeper levels of decarbonization, we're going to need a much bigger tool. Electric power, renewables and batteries can maybe get us 70 or 80% of the way there. But that last 20 or 30% are going to need some different clean technologies. Other sectors, as we've heard, including heavy-duty trucking, rail, some industrial processes, aren't really well suited for electrification, and they'll need different technologies. And that's why for deep decarbonization, hydrogen is crucial. Modest levels, like what we've seen in the past 15 years from the US, carbon emissions aren't really costed or restricted in a big way. Hydrogen is too costly. So if you're comparing hydrogen to today's natural gas, it's not going to work. But if you're comparing it to a future where you need to deeply decarbonize, you need new tools. And hydrogen is perhaps one of the best of those new tools. The potential for this market transformation is huge. In the US, we have over $1 trillion of fossil fuel use each year. That's going to have to be reduced or transformed to get to zero emission. The Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association has estimated that the US market for hydrogen could be $140 billion by 2030 and $750 billion by 2050. And worldwide, Air Liquide has estimated a 2050 hydrogen market of $2.5 trillion. And big numbers. Okay, it's not being nice to me. Did I get that? Yeah. Okay. That's the big picture. Now let's look specifically at New Mexico. As I said, I don't think any other state has this compelling set of advantages to jumpstart the hydrogen economy. We got low-cost natural gas, San Juan Basin and Permian Basin, ample wind and solar resources. These position us to be colorblind as to hydrogen. Blue hydrogen from natural gas, which is green hydrogen from solar or wind. Frankly, we don't care. We'll let the market, the economics determine the winner. And since we have opportunities for both, we're happy to segue when the market tells us that. An interesting note, people talk about different colors of hydrogen, and there are several groups there that claim one particular type of hydrogen that is superior, or more noble, or less harsh. As I said, we're colorblind, but recently the Department of Energy has done a couple of significant things. They have organized their hydrogen activities across the department for renewable energy, fossil energy, nuclear energy, etc., into a coordinated office. But they've also adopted the term clean hydrogen. It's a colorblind term as long as the carbon emissions are low or minimal. So clean hydrogen is a better focus than having the argument back and forth that blue is better than green, green is better than blue. Within that, we look at New Mexico, we see the subsurface geology is terrific in New Mexico, both for CO2 storage and clean hydrogen storage. Clean hydrogen can be stored in some salt formations or some Permian Basin, and there are a number of depleted oil and gas fields, particularly those that have historically held a high percentage of helium, which is the next smallest molecule. Something's held helium for hundreds of millions of years. It's a good chance it's a good hydrogen storage as well. And then CO2 is depleted oil reservoirs, salt saline formations, etc. New Mexico is abundant on that. Much more so than anything to the west of us. So that's a key thing. When we look at markets, we have to look at where the customers are and what they'll need. We have a very skilled workforce, oil, gas, coal, and power. Much of this being Navajo with recent retirements of coal here in New Mexico and in Arizona. Hit those workers hard. We have the natural lab experience, Lano and Sandia. Bayotech has talked about what Sandia has contributed to their business plan. So we have all the raw ingredients that make New Mexico a preferred hydrogen provider to the Southwest and California. It doesn't like that. manual transmission. We believe the strategy ought to follow logically from key principles and objectives. It's not so much a technology company, there's one that tries to look at the marketplace and the policies and figure out what combination of technologies and assets need to be brought together to make something happen. So one key principle, recognize the magnitude involved. So I said, net zero is a huge goal. It's big in size, it's big in dollars. In 2030, 2050, that's not that far away for something this big. It's a far broader market than just New Mexico in terms of population, energy consumption, economic activity. We're small relative to our neighbors on either side. So we need to engage these neighboring states and markets. This is both an outreach program and a regulatory government action type program. And we need to start talking sooner than later, because sitting back and waiting to see what happens, I think is a recipe for failure. But we also want to drive innovation to market. That while we think we need to jumpstart the economy, we know that technologies are going to improve. In some cases, improve fast. Battery storage technologies, we see this smartphone, computers. There's no reason to think that some of this won't happen as well. So you have this little conundrum of you need to start soon, but you don't want to go all in on stage one technology. You want to remain open and actually drive innovation. So our concept is that we start early with some of the known and proven elements. In this case, blue hydrogen, natural gas with steam methane reforming, carbon capture and storage on site. If you're using it for power generation, use it in existing turbines that have proven themselves to be hydrogen capable. But we started at a small scale. The initial thing activates to get the private sector involved, the financial community involved, and provides a platform for testing out the permitting you need, all of the other non-technical things you need to make something happen together, and provides a platform for testing out new technology. Once you have a site that has carbon sequestration capacity and hydrogen storage capacity, your technologies can come. You can become the test bed for these new technologies. Direct air capture, for instance, some of them may have heard. Container-sized things that come out. Looks like about a ton or two a day of carbon dioxide out of it. Where's that going to go? You're going to build a carbon storage facility for 1 or 2 tons a day. You'll never make it. If you park one on site that already has it, that becomes the hub for increased economic activity. And then lastly, what transform the decarbonization is just transition opportunities. With the hydrogen market, we can do that. Communities have been seeing decline as legacy coal capacity is required, particularly San Juan County and Arizona, or communities that might see declines in the future as the Permian Basin begins to see more and more of their production being lost to electric vehicles. That will become perhaps a future community decline. They need a transition path to a decarbonized economy that's fair and just. One example, we're in discussions with Navajo Transitional Utility Authority. They're looking to build out their solar power. We're in discussion with them about locating solar power within reach of where we can produce hydrogen power generation. Intermittent solar power coupled with dispatchable hydrogen power, build the transmission lines, that's much more efficient use of existing transmission capacity, and provides a clean and dispatchable power. That's pretty unique. Not even gonna try it. So here's the simple schematic. We've seen versions of this already, so I won't really elaborate. But it's our vision of how New Mexico anchors a clean hydrogen market in the Southwest and California. We can't do it alone. New Mexico alone as a market, while it's a good start build up, you really need to get the big guys engaged in this. Hydrogen production, we think, to begin with natural gas in the San Juan Permian Basin. It utilizes steam methane reformers, carbon capture and storage. Both basins have favorable characteristics for that. And right now, the cost estimates for this type of hydrogen, blue hydrogen, are one half to 1/4 what green hydrogen is. So if you're looking to get something to market sooner, you start with what's most sellable. Over time, if green hydrogen comes in and displaces it, more power to them. We're happy. We happen to have a state with lots of sun, and eastern part of the state would have lots of wind. Happy to transition as the market develops. But we know that the markets for hydrogen are much larger than New Mexico. California plus New Mexico added together, you get something that's pretty close to California. So if you really want to sell to the markets, you need to look at this. We have a lot of the pieces in place for the transportation infrastructure. We've seen that here and elsewhere. We've got the highways, we're moving it by truck. We have railroads, both in large trucks and railroads, of both customers as well as delivery sources. And we have a very elaborate pipeline structure. And the prospect of converting existing pipelines to hydrogen is a much more practical aspect where it can be done than to start from scratch. In some cases, hydrogen pipelines may already be hydrogen capable. In other cases, you'll need some above ground adjustments to compressors, valves, and such. Other cases, you might need to line the pipeline to protect against hydrogen embrittlement, either through various types of epoxy coatings or liners. And maybe worst case, pipeline's not suitable, but you've got a right of way. And that right of way is for those who built pipelines before, that's more than halfway there.
Excuse me, before you go on, the previous slide, you have yellow, but you can't see what it says. What is the yellow?
Down at the bottom.
Highways and rail.
Oh, I'm sorry. Highways and yeah.
And you can't see the lines on the map.
Yeah.
My
So it's
apologies.
basically I-40, I-10, I-25.
Thank you.
Okay, note to self, never use yellow fonts. So I've tried to lay out why I think New Mexico has some inherent and perhaps unique advantages. And these advantages are important, but not in and of themselves sufficient. You know, there's a classic formula that says luck plus hard work equals success. Well, we got the luck. No fault of our own, no credit to our own, but the hard work is what's ahead. And that's where we think government leadership on all levels, federal, state, and local, is needed. We can be a big supplier, but we recognize we're a small consumer. Initially, we might be a large consumer for small production, but large production is going to probably large consumers. California is the major market. There are others, but focus on California because they are both large and in a leadership position. There's no reason really to suspect that California on its own will discover the kind of value that New Mexico can offer. In fact, a lot of the countries in the world use New Mexico as a fossil energy state and not a renewable energy or a clean hydrogen producing state. So our value in a decarbonized world is less well known right now. So the question I'll pose to those who are in a position to do something is, shouldn't we integrate clean energy considerations into New Mexico's economic development and branding efforts? I mean, we've marketed hatch chilies to the world. Done a good job on that. Why can't we market clean hydrogen? This necessitates cooperation with other states, more than just advertising, particularly on things like standards and carbon accounting. Good example, the low carbon fuel standard that was proposed by the governor earlier this year to make it across the finish line. But it was a good example of how you synchronize some of your standards and accounting for mutual benefits. Because if our low carbon fuel standard looks identical or almost identical to that of California, you create a marketplace communication, ease of transactions that a totally different standard would. And so in a robust carbon accounting system, which also accounts for upstream emissions as well, for instance, local California's low carbon fuel standard, when they look at different petroleum fuels, they recognize that tar sands from Canada have a different footprint than other types of developed resources. So in a robust carbon accounting system, clean hydrogen can and should be colorblind rather than just arbitrarily constrained. Lastly, we know federal policy and programs are emerging at a rapid pace. Our congressional delegation has been active in this, and we hope they will continue to do so. This will shape the direction of our energy systems. But the important thing, Mexico needs to keep its seat at the table. In Washington, there was a saying I would hear off and on over time, is that if you're not at the table, you're probably on the table. So with that, I'll try to wrap it up quick, but thank you. Do you have any questions on time?
We've got to move on, but we'll see if there's questions at the end. But thank you, Dan, very much. The next presentation we have is from Sandia National Labs. We have Christopher Sanmarchi, who is joining us virtually, but then we do have two representatives and his colleagues, Brian Earhart and Barry Roberts, here with us in the room. And the next topic is going to be about blending natural gas and hydrogen into pipelines and transportation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for accommodating me here from California. I'm at our California site for Sandia National Labs, but as was mentioned, two of my colleagues there are in the room, Brian Earhart and Barry Roberts. And I basically have three things I want to try to accomplish, and I'll try to do this quickly, although I have a lot of slides. I'll skip over some of the content rapidly. I want to touch on the excitement around hydrogen. I want to talk about the potential for blending hydrogen into natural gas infrastructure, and then briefly maybe touch on some opportunities there in New Mexico. All the speakers before me have generated a lot of excitement or demonstrated the excitement for hydrogen. I'll just note here, some of the things that are happening in Washington, for example. Some pretty big players here have been giving congressional testimony about the importance of hydrogen. We heard mention of the IPP Renewed project. Sandia actually has a role in that, providing some technical expertise there in Delta, Utah, to supply green power to Southern California. So my perspective is sort of the DOE perspective. And if you're familiar with what's happening at DOE, this is sort of the guiding principle that the DOE has been promoting for hydrogen. It's called Hydrogen at Scale. And a lot of this has been touched on already, so I won't go into too much detail, but hydrogen plays a potential pivotal role in our energy systems, in particular for the allowance of hydrogen to not only supply energy, but to store energy. And I want to emphasize that storage aspect. We haven't touched on that too much today, but hydrogen has a potential to service not only transportation, but a lot of different manufacturing needs, as was mentioned: cement manufacturing, steel making, glass making. A lot of different manufacturing technologies could really benefit from hydrogen to remove carbon from their cycles. Hydrogen's not new. I mean, we've been doing hydrogen for a long time. This has also been mentioned. It's used quite extensively in refining. And the real challenge with growing the hydrogen infrastructure is really the cost, because of the scale that we're talking about. If you want to use gas networks or replace gas networks, those are huge investments. Or replacing gasoline stations with hydrogen stations, the scale is just sort of mind-bending in a way. if you may remember the 70s and the oil embargo, some of my former colleagues used to talk about the first coming of the hydrogen economy, which was motivated by those events. That first coming of the hydrogen economy didn't quite stick, but we had a lot of work at Sandia at that time. And even though that didn't quite stick, we've been plugging away at this problem for many, many years and have a lot of expertise in hydrogen technologies. The mobile light stand, Stewart mentioned that earlier. That was a concept in a project that was led out of Sandia in terms of developing that application, and IGX has taken that up and producing those units. Today, hydrogen is a big part of our activities, our energy activities at Sandia. We have quite broad capabilities and activities, from everything from hydrogen production using concentrated solar. You may be aware of the National Solar Test Facility in Albuquerque at Sandia, leverage that quite heavily. We have activities in hydrogen storage, materials compatibility, and that's where our perspectives on blending hydrogen into natural gas come from. And safety is a big part of our activities. So we do a lot of work in hydrogen safety and lead a lot of the safety activities for the Department of Energy around hydrogen. So let's talk a bit about blending. You may have heard about HyBlend, which is a new project that we are anticipating to start next month. And this is a multinational lab project that's looking at the opportunity space for blending hydrogen into natural gas. There are three main components of that project: structural integrity, that's the work that I do, and that's the highest priority task that was identified by many stakeholders, understanding what the effects of hydrogen are on the infrastructure. And then there are also tasks on emissions, life cycle analysis for emissions, what is the opportunity space, and the techno-economic analysis looking at the economies of scale. The output from this project, which has over 20 stakeholder participants, 5 national labs, the output is really providing industry-focused tools to understand this opportunity of hydrogen in natural gas infrastructure. So it's a very, very exciting project. And so if you allow me to geek out for a moment, so the next few slides are rather technical, but I think it's important to provide some context around blending hydrogen into natural gas. We've done a lot of work looking at the effects of hydrogen on pipeline steels and other steels as well, but in particular pipeline steels, and looking at the effects of hydrogen on those steels. And what's really important are a few things. One is hydrogen strongly affects the properties of these steels, but don't let that derail us. That isn't necessarily a showstopper. In addition, the variation from different materials is not that significant. And that's really a huge advantage, because that gives us a very strong baseline for understanding these properties. And you may not be familiar with a plot like this, but this is a plot essentially trying to assess the fatigue behavior of different steels. These colored symbols were tests that were performed in gaseous hydrogen compared to tests that were performed in air. And what we can see is there's a pretty large difference here, but that can be accommodated. And in addition, we see, if you're familiar with the designation for transmission pipe, these X designations just represent different strength steels. We see that we get very similar behavior across this entire range. And so questions that are often asked of me with regard to these behaviors is, what about welds? How do these behaviors translate to low pressure? Because that's the context of blending. And ultimately, what is the effect of pressure on some of the other properties that are important, such as fracture? So we've done a lot of testing on welds. Welds behave very similar to the base materials with regard to hydrogen effects. And we've also done some testing at low pressure. So this is, again, some of that fatigue data. And we did some tests in 100% hydrogen and 3% hydrogen. And what you can see here is there's not much difference, and in some range, there's no difference. So there's perception that there's some threshold below which we don't have to worry about hydrogen in natural gas is false. Even very small amounts of hydrogen in natural gas have a pretty substantial effect. But again, not all is lost. I'll show some analysis that shows that this can be accommodated here in just a moment. And another property that we worry about in addition to fatigue is fracture. And this is just trying to show that very small quantities of hydrogen can have a very substantial effect on fracture resistance. So this is normalized, but you can see that just 1 bar of hydrogen, so essentially 1 atmosphere of hydrogen, actually less than 1 atmosphere, has a very strong effect. As you go to higher pressures, you continue to have those effects, but they don't change all that much. Even that first amount has a substantial effect. But as I said, we can do some analysis, structural analysis, to try to understand what those effects are and what the magnitude of those effects are. And so this is a typical fatigue analysis looking at a defect in a pipe and how that defect grows with fatigue cycles. And this was all done with taking into consideration those effects of hydrogen on the pipe. And what we can see is that if we start with a defect that's quite large, so in this case, 25% through the wall of the pipe, we don't see any crack growth for the particular conditions that were calculated here. And in this case, we were assuming pure hydrogen at 10 megapascal pressure, which is a pretty high pressure. Even with a deep flaw, so if we have a flaw that's 50% through the pipe wall, that flaw will grow, but it grows relatively slowly, such that we still have a very large potential lifetime in that structure. The structure is not going to imminently fail just because hydrogen is in that pipe. And this is another representation of that kind of information focused more on the fracture behavior. And so this is a failure assessment diagram, which is a typical way to characterize pressure equipment. And essentially you have this boundary that bounds an unsafe region versus a safe region. And we looked at, in this case, it was distribution piping, but we could do something similar for transmission pipe. And what we found that if we take into consideration the effects of hydrogen on the material properties, that we still remain within the safe region of these structures. So what all of this tells us is that even though hydrogen affects the materials, those can be accommodated in these structures. And that's essentially what I'm summarizing here on this slide. You know, from a materials perspective, we know, and we have very strong baseline on how hydrogen affects fatigue and fracture behavior of pipeline steels. And those effects are significant even at very low pressure. But if we take that information and roll it into a structural analysis and develop a structural perspective, what we see is that those hydrogen effects do not necessarily compromise the structural integrity of piping and pipelines. Of course, we need to consider the details of any given system that we're putting hydrogen in to verify what those impacts are going to be. But in general, to first order, our infrastructure should certainly be able to accommodate hydrogen, both in a blended environment, but also pure hydrogen. Many of our infrastructure components can certainly handle pure hydrogen. It's just a question of how do we manage the operations of those systems. Now, I'd just like to touch on a couple additional points about opportunities that are, I think, relevant there in New Mexico. You know, if we're going to talk about these large-scale projects like IPP for power production, we need to be sure that we have hydrogen available, and that what that drives is hydrogen storage. And part of that IPP project, for example, they're planning to store hundreds of millions of kilograms of hydrogen on site in subsurface geography. In that particular case, it's salt caverns, but there are many other opportunities for storage of hydrogen. We store, as I'm sure you're all aware, we store fossil fuels underground all the time. And the anticipation is that we will be doing the same things with hydrogen. There remain some open research questions, and Sandia is active in trying to address some of those to understand what the hydrogen implications are in depleted reservoirs, for example, aquifers or lined hard rock caverns. And I think there's a definite opportunity in the San Juan Basin and the Permian Basin to consider these subsurface storage technologies as an important component of hydrogen storage. Now, with regard to New Mexico in general and opportunities for hydrogen, so this graphic comes from a study from NREL, which shows what is the net hydrogen production potential. And the darker blues represent greater potential. And so you can see there's quite a lot of opportunity here in New Mexico for production of hydrogen. And this is only considering wind and PV production. Of course, there are other opportunities that could evolve using things like concentrated solar to produce hydrogen as well. And my colleague Brian that's there in the room did some back of the envelope calculations to look at what might some of the demands for hydrogen be in New Mexico. And we've had some conversations with the city of Albuquerque about bus fleets. And if the entire bus fleet in Albuquerque was converted to hydrogen, we're talking around 600 kilograms of hydrogen per day. We've been doing a lot of work recently at opportunities in rail, freight, for example, locomotives that operate on hydrogen. And if the Strauss yard used hydrogen in Santa Teresa, we're talking about close to 2 million kilograms of hydrogen demand per day to power all of those locomotives if they were all converted to hydrogen. So there are some pretty significant opportunities, and this doesn't even touch on some of the other opportunities that have been talked about today, such as heavy duty trucks and trucking using hydrogen. And then, of course, there are other captive fleets that could benefit, for example, at Kirkland Air Force Base, at airports, garbage trucks, forklifts, which is a dramatically growing application space around the world, actually. And Sandia has been quite engaged in conversations with folks in New Mexico. This is just a partial list and some of the active conversations. We heard from Bayotech earlier today, New Mexico Gas Company. We've been talking about opportunities there and talking about a memorandum of understanding and some safety analysis. We do work at New Mexico Tech in the safety realm. And also we have some partnerships at White Sands Test Facility. And all these activities are really in the safety realm. And we've been having a lot of discussion internally recently about opportunities to develop concepts for RD&D in the San Juan Basin around both production and subsurface storage. So we're really excited about opportunities there and really excited about potential partnerships where we can exploit the expertise in that realm and bring Sandia's expertise in geologic storage and safety for hydrogen. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind, but I'll stop there. And thank you for your attention. And you can see here some of the contact information for myself and my colleagues there in the room, and you're welcome to reach out to us. And these slides are certainly available for future reference. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. William Ampomah from New Mexico Tech to talk to us about carbon capture here locally in Wells. And
thanks so much, and thanks, Jason, for inviting us to be part of this great conversation. So New Mexico Tech, we've been into CO2 storage for a very long time, and through the slides, I will show you my experiences. I'll tell you about our experiences, what we've been able to accomplish, and a potential for collaboration to also help companies to be able to implement CCS, in their facilities as well. So as we look at CCS or CCUS, there are two options. The one that we are very much familiar in the US that has been utilized for most often is the one where we take the CO2, we put it in a pipeline and we inject into depleted oil reservoir so that the oil in there will become much less viscous so it can be moved, for us to have more production. And the other one is the actual saline storage, which is now coming up because of the economics involved in that. It's very expensive. Like just taking the CO2 from a plant, wherever, and just putting it down. So there has to be something to make it more economical, or at least to incentivize the companies to be able to do that. And New Mexico Tech has experience in both areas. So the first one that I'll talk about is that we are in the space. New Mexico Tech is in the space when it comes to DOE funding for carbon sequestration projects. It began way back in 2002. And I know our folks from Lanol and also from Sandia, they've been involved in all these projects way back since 2002. And DOE formed 7 regional partnerships. And if you look at the Southwest region, New Mexico Tech is the lead organization. And we have over 60 or 50 scientists all working on this project. And in this project, they started from different sites. I joined in 2013, but way back in 2003, and I know Rajesh is in the building from Nano, they started looking at the regional scale. I recall they've done some work in Utah, they've done some work in the South Crook region, and other parts, of the, and even within the San Juan, early years in that project. But as you can see, we've moved through to a process where we've been able to demonstrate, field demonstration of the CO2 that we take from a power plant and inject into oil reservoir for us to be able to produce more oil. So here I'm showing you one example where we've demonstrated the taking CO2 from actual power plants and being able to use that. So here, let me try and see if I can do it here. Here we do have the Farnsworth Field Unit. That is where we've been able to actually do a demonstration. We had a partnership with the field operator, and they gave us access to that. We were interested in the science, but the operator was interested in how to be able to inject the CO2 and be able to recover more oil. And I must say that during this phase 3 of our project, DOE sponsored 3 wells for us to drill 3 wells to be able to monitor the CO2 that has been injected, the movement, and also be able to characterize the reservoir for a potential CO2 injection. And we've been able to inject, the operator has been able to inject over 1.4 million tons of CO2 to be able to recover more oil. And I must say that through the sponsorship of DOE, we've been able to, based on the work that we've done since 2013 on this field, we've been able to help the company to put the application together from scratch for MRV, for them to be able to get a 45 kiloton credit. And I'm very privileged and glad to say that the application got approved. So New Mexico Tech has a track record where we can help companies to be able to start from scratch, putting in all the work to be able to help them apply for 45 kilo tax credit. And we've been able to demonstrate that. And also through one of our projects, through one of our projects, we've been able to also, we are still in the process of putting in 2 new MRV plants for a company in the state of New Mexico. So there are other projects too that DOE has sponsored us, all still to be able to store CO2 underground. One of the projects is the subsurface stress characterization, where we are able to look at attribute the changes in stress or changes in subsurface pressure attributed to the CO2 that is injected into the system. And also we have another new project that is coming up, and we're going to start this month with Los Alamos and also with Los Alamos and with some other partners, where we are going to drill a well, and that is the main topic I'm going to talk about, the carbon safe project that is going on in the San Juan Basin. During that well, DOE has also given us some money to be able to install fiber optics right behind the casing when we drill the well, to be able to look at the potential microseismic events attributed to the CO2 injection, and also measuring pressure and then also temperature. and even looking at how the CO2 that we injected will move away from the wellbore. So all of this is telling you that New Mexico Tech is really at the forefront, getting DOE funded to be able to do all of this. And the latest one, we call it the regional initiative, where DOE has sponsored several projects within different regions. And New Mexico Tech is one of them. So if you look through what I'm showing you here, it's easy to see, but if you look at the Southwest region here, New Mexico Tech is controlling all this portion with multiple groups, institutions, all looking into how we can store CO2 within the region. The same if you look at here it's difficult to see, but if you look at the light blue region, it is one partnership that New Mexico Tech is leading with different institutions. And all what we're doing here is to be able to identify storage sites within these regions and also be able to demonstrate the injection of CO2 within these regions. And the good thing about this is that through that regional initiative, DOE has also sponsored two multiple projects within that. One is the feed study that is going on at the San Juan Generating Station plant. They're looking at how they can retrofit that plant to be able to capture the CO2 that is coming from the coal power plant. And also the another big project that New Mexico Tech is leading is the carbon safe project, where we're going to take that CO2 coming from that plant, or let's say any plant in the state of New Mexico, taking that CO2 and be able to inject that CO2 within the San Juan Basin. So what I'm going to talk about is the carbon safe. Now, the carbon safe project started way back in 2016, where DOE started funding several 13 projects and even the phase 2. So a total of about 19 projects. They went through phase 1 and phase 2. And all of it was to identify a storage complex within the regions. And that is the phase 1 and then the phase 2. Now we are in the phase 3. And I'm sure folks in New Mexico should be proud that New Mexico Tech, we did not compete in the phase 1. We did not compete in the phase 2. But when Enchant Energy thought that they wanted to retrofit the San Juan Generating Station, it gives us the opportunity to put in the application. And we're able to compete with all the projects, 19 projects that went through phase 1 and phase 2 and won one of these projects. So we've been able to win one of these projects, telling us that New Mexico Tech is really at the forefront, where we do have the technology with Sandia and also with Los Alamos all combined to be able to prove that within the San Juan Basin, we can store CO2 right there. And that is the carbon safe project. It is a $23 million project. And all that we're doing with all our partners listed right here is to be able to see if we can safely store CO2 within the San Juan Basin. And I must say that we did not go through phase 1, phase 2. So it was not easy for us at all. As we go through the project, we needed to do all the work that has been done in phase 1 and phase 2 to qualify to put in the application for phase 3. And we could not have done this without the support of all these communities and companies that give us support. You know, I want to say, you know, I'm the lead principal investigator of the Carbon Safe project. So I speak for the project. I really want to thank all the organizations that really helped us. They gave us supporting letters. All these either companies or cities, they gave us supporting letters showing their support of this project. And we were able to win that because it was not easy. And DOE sponsored only 5. And think about 19 projects going through phase 1 and phase 2. And they only picked 5 projects to go into phase 3. New Mexico Tech did not compete in any of them. But based on the support that we received from the San Juan region, we were able to win that project. And like I said, the whole objective of the phase 3 project is to be able to perform a comprehensive detailed site characterization within the San Juan Basin to be able to prove that we have enough storage capacity within the San Juan region or the San Juan Basin to store significant amount of CO2. And we also do the techno-economic analysis to look at the impact if we're able to retrofit the San Juan Generating Station or even any plant that can come up. With hydrogen that we're talking about today, you cannot do without CO2 coming out of the plants. So definitely those plants needs to also be retrofitted to extract the CO2 coming out of that operation. And the work that is sponsored by the US government should be able to give us hope that within the San Juan Basin, we should be able to store the CO2 that is coming out through the region. And I'll show you why it's that in a second. So here are just some few details, and we're going to drill a well in the fall 2021. Fall 2021, we are going to drill the characterization well, which is going to cost about $5 to $6 million. And all that we're going to do is to be able to take information, geological information. Within the San Juan region, we know a lot, especially within the formation that we are producing the oil and gas. The Dakota, we know a lot about it. The Mississippi, we know a lot about it. But as you go deeper into the target formations, we don't know a lot about it. But this project is going to be able to help us to understand the subsurface geology, to be able to do that. And we've already purchased a 3D seismic. If you look at the purple boundary, we've purchased a 3D seismic, which was about $1.6 million. And we are looking into it. We are interpreting the seismic data to be able to fully understand the subsurface geology within the San Juan Basin. And we've moved sites a lot. So, this is just a plea, to the leaders of New Mexico. Because if you look at when the previous presentation showed the amount of support that a lot of states are getting, especially with this carbon safe projects, we hope that we'll get a lot of support from the state. We've moved a lot of sites. We started with the state land. We couldn't get permission from the state lands office. We moved to BLM. It was taking a long time for the permitting process. And the partner that we are working with now purchased about 160 acres of land for us to put the well on there. So if New Mexico is really interested in decarbonization, we cannot do away without looking at the capturing of the CO2 and also the injecting of these CO2. So we've been able to secure a private land where we're going to site the well, but we could have done better, right, with the state land. So this is just a plea that the state should support us, to be able to prove that within the San Juan region, we are able to store CO2 within that area. And the geology of the San Juan, we know that. Based on all the information with regards to the oil and gas operations, it is safe, to be able to, if the oil and gas operations are safe, then I can assure you that the CO2 sequestration too is going to be safe. And this is all because of the research that we are embarking on now. The San Juan Basin covers about 7,500 square miles, and it's all New Mexico, Utah, and also Colorado, all combined. So if we are able to prove that the geology within the San Juan region is good enough for CO2 storage, how much more when we move to hydrogen economy, with all the CO2 that will be coming out in the more commercial quantities, based on the studies that New Mexico Tech is leading, can help us to know that the CO2 that we're going to store there, we are going to inject there is safe and will not come out to the surface. So we've done tremendous amount of work, and we are partnering with the state geological agencies. The good thing about New Mexico Tech, you have Petroleum Recovery Research Center, and also you have the Bureau of Geology right at New Mexico Tech. And we're not, if it was not Bureau of Geology, who knew all the geology within the San Juan region, we wouldn't have been able to win that grant. So they helped us a lot. And we've been able to identify about 3 formations within the San Juan region. We are not really targeting the oil and gas layers formations. We are going deeper to the saline aquifers, where we believe that the CO2 can be there and be stored in a safe manner. So we've identified the Entrada formation as our main target for potential CO2 injection, the Entrada formation. And we also have the salt wash member of the Marchi, and then also the bluff. So there are 3 main formations beneath, all the way beneath the oil and gas formations, producing formations, that we can safely store CO2 in there. And if you look at the nice strat column is the one that the carbon safe project has recently developed. The one on the far left is the one, or the right is the one that was in literature, and the geologists use that to be able to identify these 3 formations. And we also have identified the cap rock layers that can really help to maintain the CO2 that will be injected in the San Juan Basin, or let's say into the Entrada or the other formation. And I must say that there is saltwater disposal going on in these formations that we are targeting. So if we can inject water, why not can we inject CO2? But we are using science to prove that. And also, as most of us technical folks know, before you can get the EPA UIC Class 6, which is the objective of this project, to be able to apply for UIC Class 6 permit and get that for operations, you need to be able to also prove that the formation that you want to inject, the CO2, also has a TDS or total dissolved salts, more than 10,000. And if you look through the San Juan region, this is a tricky thing, because there are folks, if you look through the formation, as the basin tips to the edges, the salinity becomes more like a fresh water, right? So there are people who believe that even within the entire San Juan Basin, we don't have enough salinity. But the answer is we do have a lot of good salinity, about 10,000, to be able to inject safely in there. And that is what our project is about, to be able to establish this as well. And if you look through here, all the formations that we are targeting, right between the center of the basin, do have TPS, which is more than 10,000 parts per million. And also in terms of the storage capacity, the question is, do we have enough capacity to store the CO2? We had a call with the senator telling us, he was asking us, do we have enough capacity to store CO2 within the San Juan Basin? And based on our initial assessment, even this one is just based on 18 mile by 18 mile. You can see the numbers that even the Entrada alone has the ability to store over 141 million tons of CO2. Not to even talk of the other formations that we are targeting. So the San Juan Basin, I must say, based on the work that we've done now, proves that we can safely store CO2 within the region. So we do have that enough capacity to be able to get into the hydrogen economy with all the CO2 that will be coming in. The San Juan Basin do have the capacity to store all this amount of CO2 that will be generated. So let me wrap it up. And this conversation is also about hydrogen, but you cannot produce hydrogen without the CO2, so they go hand in hand. And New Mexico Tech now is really into active research into hydrogen as well. So there are some few questions, research questions, that we are trying to answer, and we are also trying to collaborate with other entities that are interested in hydrogen research to be able to respond to this. And we have tremendous amount of experience in the storage aspect. So that is where we really want to focus on. So when you inject the hydrogen into a geological formation, do we know how it's going to mix with the formation fluid in there? Because we want to still take back the hydrogen. So that we need to do some research to look at the mixing processes of the hydrogen that we can inject or store subsurface. And also the separation, once you have different minerals reacting with your hydrogen, do we know how to separate them out when we try to get it back again? And also, this formation that we want to target for hydrogen storage, is there a possible way to do some pre-treatment of this formation so that it will be ready for us to put in hydrogen in there and be able to produce it back to avoid some of the separation issues? And also, is there any biochemical effects cycling with the formation that we are injecting the hydrogen? And also, what is the process and also the workflow for the hydrogen storage in the salt domes? We know the salt domes works. And even in New Mexico, we also have some reservoirs with helium presence in there. And based on the studies, we believe that that could be a good potential reservoirs to be able to store hydrogen. But if there is nitrogen in there, do we know how it's going to react and how we're going to separate it out? So these are all research questions. And we want to be able to partner with New Mexico companies to be able to respond to all of this. And I've showed you all the track record when it comes to DOE funding. We are on top of that. So if we all come together, and if there is a call, and we all come together and put a strong proposal together, New Mexico Tech, we believe that we should be able to help to make the hydrogen economy really work for us. And also, have we talked about the water that is needed for the SMR process? Have we talked about using treated produced water? You know, how is it going to affect the operations? That is something New Mexico Tech is looking at right now. So with all this, you know, I'm going to end here and say that we do have tremendous amount of experience when it comes to CO2 storage. We've demonstrated that, and we've been able to compete. You know, so the other states are not really moving ahead of us. New Mexico Tech has really put the stake right there, where we've been able to compete on CO2 storage projects way back from 2002 till now. And we've had all the big DOE grants when it comes to CO2 storage projects. And also we've been able to demonstrate applying for MRVs to help companies get the 45Q tax credit. We got one approved, and we have two companies, we have two now that we're working on for a New Mexico company, still going through EPA approval now. And DOE recently brought up FOA for fee study. New Mexico Tech is looking for partners, you know, who are interested to apply for government grants to be able to help them to do fee study. We are right there looking for partners to support them to apply for this. And also we are actively right now in research, you know, looking for collaborative research potentials, looking into CO2 or hydrogen storage. That is where our strength is. So we are looking at it, hydrogen storage. When we take it, which formation can we store that within the San Juan region? That is an area that New Mexico Tech is right into it, and we are looking for partners. So thanks so much for listening, and I appreciate it.
The next presentation is from PNM, Mr. Nick Phillips, presenting on their behalf. And some of what we wanted to identify in this conversation is about electrical transmission capabilities out of the San Juan Basin to those markets that we've been talking about all morning. And so very much appreciate, Nick, your attendance this morning and enlightening us about what our capabilities are.
Very good.
Mr. Nick Phillips, everybody.
Good, still morning, good morning, almost afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Nick Phillips. I'm the Director of Integrated Resource Planning for Public Service in New Mexico. And we're going to talk a little bit about the transmission, mainly coming in and out of the San Juan generating station, the switch yard there, as well as the Four Corners and Shiprock switch yards. So the first slide I have here shows what is electrically connected in these areas, and generally from an electric basis, we consider all three switch yards electrically equivalent. There's not really any transmission constraints between the three. One thing that does present some issues though is there's a lot of ownership by multiple parties in this area. There's actually 8 different companies that own pieces of these different switch yards and electrical equipment. So trying to know who you need to talk to, depending on where you're trying to ship power to, becomes very, very difficult. So what I have on the slide here, anything that is in solid lines indicates a line that is owned by PNM or partially owned by PNM. And so, for example, the line that's heading south from the circle there down to Arizona and southwest New Mexico, that's mostly owned by APS, but PNM has about a 10% share of that. Anything that's dotted is owned 100% by utilities or entities not PNM. So there's roughly 8,000 total megawatts of capacity leaving this area, but only 2,000 megawatts is owned by PNM, and predominantly it's coming from the switch yards there back into the load centers where the arrows are showing into Albuquerque and Santa Fe. That's where the majority of PNM's load is. So that's where the majority of PNM's transmission capacity is going. Everything else is owned by other folks. So I can't speak specifically to what is going on in their lines. I'll talk a little bit later about where you can find some of that information. But depending on where you're trying to get power to, you have to know which transmission providers you need to talk to. You might actually need to pay rates to 2, 3, 4, 5 different transmission providers, depending on where you're trying to ship power. We go forward one more slide here. So taking a look at this is now generally the major paths that we see when we're talking about the flows and the directions they're going to go. The major cut point here shown by northern New Mexico, that's what we call White Path 48. Typically when PNM issues requests for proposals, we're looking for power that's going to be entering Path 48 and then coming down into Albuquerque, Santa Fe, where our major load centers are. All these other ones are predominantly owned by other entities. Typically, there's not much trouble getting power out north into Colorado, but there's not very much demand going north into Colorado either. So that's why there's not much problem taking it that direction. The most demanded path is going west out of Four Corners towards Arizona and into California. There's roughly 2,400 megawatts of capacity going along that path, but it's very similar to P&M. It's pretty well fully subscribed for long-term firm transmission. Now, there's a big difference between long-term and short-term transmission. This will get into the idea of how do you actually look at scheduling power out into different markets. Typically, when folks are looking to build new generation resources, they're looking for long-term firm capacity in order to get financing that will allow them to ensure delivery of their resources. The issue that we have right now is we're fully subscribed, and most other utilities in this area are fully subscribed on long-term firm point-to-point. So that makes it very difficult for some folks to get financing. So the downside of this is if we want to grow as a state, we're restricted in the sense because we can't add a whole lot of new load, especially in Albuquerque or Santa Fe, without triggering the need for both new generation and new transmission. And those are long lead time projects. A lot of people who are looking to come here want to come here quickly. So I add that as a side note. So we've got to figure some way around this if we want to allow our state to grow. Now, how do you figure out what you want to do? Well, some developers could decide, or power producers could decide they want to schedule transmission a different way. You can schedule shorter term transmission, short-term burn point to point. And like when P&M schedules its generation resources, about 2 years out, we start to look at, well, how much transmission do we need? If there's things that we can let go, we'll post on what's called our OASIS website, it's an open access system for securing transmission capacity and scheduling. And we'll let folks know, hey, we don't think we're going to need as much in this season or in this day. And people can then go and buy that transmission on a short-term basis. Now, the issue then becomes if you're looking to sell power to the markets, you would have to be going on the site every single day, scheduling transmission every single day, as opposed to just knowing that you can schedule your generation resources all the time. That's the difference between short-term and long-term transmission. Now, there's going to be some additional challenges, but also some additional opportunities as we add more and more intermittent resources onto our system. And one thing I would point out is just because the San Juan coal plant may come offline for a little bit, we're waiting to see what happens with the carbon capture project. That doesn't open up transmission. All of that transmission that's been associated with the power deliveries from the coal plant has been reallocated to the resources that are going to be serving P&M's customers once that plant is no longer serving P&M. But when we add a lot of these new resources, they don't produce at the same frequency as the traditional assets. So there's going to be variability on the system. The variability in the system can actually create counterflows such that there's going to be more opportunity to schedule short-term transmission, even if long-term still is not there. As the pattern wind farm comes online and more transmission that's utilized to take power from east to west, that creates counterflows and could open up short-term transmission to bring power back from west to east. Finally, as we want to think about, well, how do we schedule transmission? How do we find out the information that we're going to need? P&Ms, like I said, we're pretty well fully subscribed long-term. But short-term, you can still find it. And anybody else's transmission, you can still find what transmission capacity is available by visiting the OASIS websites for the respective entities that own that transmission. A little bit below here, I show the possible transmission providers coming out of the San Juan Four Corners area. Again, you'll see there's 8 different entities there. And knowing which one of them you want to try to schedule over their transmission system, you have to talk to each of them individually. There's no single way to go and just make a request, say, I want to go from San Juan to California. You're going to have to talk to each different transmission provider along the way. Each of them will have their own transmission rates, which are posted on the OASIS websites. And you may end up having to pay, again, 3 or 4 different transmission providers to go from New Mexico across Arizona to California. So that's really all I had. I know that it's a little bit short. I know we're running short on time as well, though, so I don't feel too bad.
Is that we have tremendous opportunity for a hydrogen economy and hydrogen hub in the San Juan Basin. And an opportunity around exports, around pipelines that we've heard from Sandia and the HyBlend project. But we also have some constraints, and it's a matter of figuring out the challenges in those constraints such that we can encourage a new economy in the San Juan Basin and across the state of New Mexico. We do have a final presentation, and it's really an opportunity for me to express my sincerest appreciation to San Juan College School of Energy and to Alicia for first allowing us the opportunity to use this room, but really more importantly in being a center for excellence. And I know we use that term frequently, but in bringing people together. And Alicia, you brought me together with this final presenter, George Guthrie, as part of this broader conversation about what it is that we can do as a community and what it is that we can do as a state. And this conference, this roundtable, this conversation is really a byproduct of you bringing us together. So thank you. And thank you very much to San Juan College for that opportunity. And with that, our final presenter today is George Guthrie, who's going to provide us kind of an overview of what our paths of opportunity are. And so thank you, George, for being here today and for providing us your insights.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Alicia, for bringing us together. I do really appreciate your leadership in the area and the opportunity now to begin with Jason and others. So, and thank you all for sticking it out. And I guess as the last speaker, I have the honor of saying good afternoon. I planned to say good morning, but that's late plans. So I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of what I was going to talk about. And at the end, I'll have my email address. Slides are available. I'm happy to send those to you. There's going to be some email or some web addresses to opportunities for funding at Sandia, Los Alamos. So you might, I can send you those. I'll go through them very quickly, but you can get the slides later if you're interested in those. So as Jason said, I want to talk about some of the opportunities we have for being able to work with you all in developing a plan for the region. And there are really two things that I want you to take away from this. The first of these is that DOE is shifting its focus to moving from where it's traditionally been, which is enabling R&D. So funding basic research that looks at a long-term goal. And it's really trying to shift that now to expand out into how do you deploy that? And how do you deploy that very rapidly? So the way it's doing that is through what's called place-based deployment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what that means for us. The other takeaway is that we've heard a lot about hydrogen and the need to deploy quickly. We've heard that there's a role for CO2 in this, in the sense that you have to capture CO2 and store it. My other message for you today is that the CO2 has a role beyond just storing it as a waste. We think that's a very important opportunity for a lot of the CO2. But in the long run, we need to look for other other value-added products that CO2 can enable. And many of those, it turns out, are associated with hydrogen. So there's a really symbiotic relationship between hydrogen and CO2. And we think that symbiotic relationship is really important for this region for being able to accelerate the deployment of both hydrogen and CO2. So those are the two main takeaways. The other piece that I'm going to talk about is a phase 1 study that DOE has asked to be done to look at what are the opportunities in this region and the strategy for this region to deploy quickly. So this is part of the place-based strategy that I mentioned DOE is looking at. So what does place-based mean? Place-based, really the main focus for you to look at is on the right-hand side here. And place-based really means moving from research that's being done at a national scale and looking at a long term to tailoring that research to what is needed for a regional scale where you need to deploy, beginning to partner that research with entities in the region so that you can move from a research to a demonstration phase. And ultimately, the goal of this is to deploy rapidly and have an impact on the region. So that's really where DOE is trying to put a lot of emphasis in the current administration. So for us, what that really means is up here. It's about translating the national goal, which is rapid transition to carbon neutral energy economies, and looking at how that translates into local goals, needs, and concerns. That's what our assessment for this next year is going to be. It's trying to identify what those local goals are, what the needs and concerns and expectations are, and how you begin mapping from this national goal down to how we can move forward in the region. I'm going to have a slide at the end that gives you information on who to contact about this. But one of the things that we really want to be able to do is to have a very aggressive outreach, getting a lot of engagement with people to understand what these local goals are, going from communities to Navajo Nation, to other sovereign nations, to states, to the region. We've seen this already from Chris, so I'm not really going to go into it in detail, but I'm just going to echo what he said, and that is the Department of Energy has had decades of R&D in hydrogen. And there's still R&D that's needed to occur, and it's still investing in that. But as you see on the left-hand side here, there's been a shift from thinking about the enabling R&D to an earth shot. And so hydrogen is one of the earth shots that's being proposed to try to get things to move very quickly. For this region, we've already heard a lot about this. It means two things. We have both green and blue hydrogen opportunities in the region. And so we need to understand what these are and how you might evolve from a situation where we can start today and then begin moving to a goal that we have that might be in the 10 to 15 year time frame. Turns out, as we've already heard, CO2 is very important. Capturing the CO2 associated with hydrogen production is essential. It turns out that CO2 capture needs to be accelerated even beyond that. Even if we have an aggressive shift to renewable energy, we still need to do CO2 capture to be able to meet our climate goals. And so how do we do that? Ultimately, we might be ending up doing direct air capture of CO2, but we need to start at point sources. And so that's part of what we need to understand within the region. How do we start CO2 capture at point sources and use that to generate the economy around CO2, economy around hydrogen, and exploit this symbiosis that I'm talking about. What might that economy look like? This is specific to the Four Corners area, and this is based on some work we started a couple of years ago for DOE. And what I want you to focus on is the piece in the bottom, and that is that in the CO2 economy specifically, if we're only thinking about storing the CO2 as just stored CO2, you can generate an economy, you can get to a carbon neutral economy, so that's capturing 300 million tons of CO2 a year. But to get there, you've got to move beyond point sources, but you also need to think beyond geologic. If you just focus on the geologic piece, we're at a $15 billion a year economy. If you begin adding value-added products for that CO2 in, for at least some of the CO2, then you can get up to a $75 billion a year economy. So this would be a huge economic opportunity beyond just the tax credits for storing CO2 underground. It turns out, if you look at the two stars, those are two examples of this symbiosis with hydrogen. One of them is capture that we've already been hearing about. But an end game for the region might be looking at that bottom star. And that is, how do you take hydrogen and couple it with CO2 captured directly from the air and enable some sustainable products that can replace what we're getting from fossil fuels right now? So that could, for example, be aviation fuel would be one of those targets. That end game might be something that we can think about as we look at the strategy within the region, where we start on some things in the next 5 years, recognizing that those things are not where we want to be in the end, but there is this end game that can get us to carbon neutral in a big economy. Stage deployment. We've heard a little bit about this already as well. This is an example of an early this isn't intended to be the final answer, but we wanted to get something on paper to give a sense of what we hope to come out of this first year assessment. And that is, we need a plan that can start today. In fact, there's technology that we can use to start doing this today. We recognize that what we start doing today will not be what we want to do in 15 years. There's R&D that's needed to accelerate the technology that we'll deploy in that 15-year time frame. We've heard a lot about New Mexico leadership, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. We have a broad energy mix, broad base of industrial and technological expertise. We've heard about both of these. New Mexico can be a leader within this region. And I'm going to talk about the region because I think when we think about building a new economy around these energy areas, putting that economy in an ecosystem is really strong for New Mexico. So it helps New Mexico to be part of this Intermountain area. It doesn't mean that it can't provide the leadership. In fact, we believe that New Mexico can, but partnering with these states can enable an even stronger piece for New Mexico. Nyla has, it's an R&D organization. We've been doing research across a number of areas, including the blue hydrogen spectrum, going all the way from pulling methane out of the ground and putting CO2 back under the ground. What does this really mean for you and the region trying to move things forward? Because Sandia has similar capabilities, New Mexico Tech. We've heard about a number of these capabilities that we all have. What it means is that DOE is moving to a point in the space-based space where they want to find how you can take advantage of the technological expertise that's been developed in the labs and universities and use that to help move things forward. So one of those mechanisms is going to be new funding from DOE. We've heard a bit about that. Possibly a hub. Maybe this year assessment that we're doing might help lead to that. But there actually turns out some things you can do right away to engage both Los Alamos and Sandia. I'm going to spin through these very quickly just so you know that they're there. Again, I'll provide the slides too if you want more contacts. But there are a number of mechanisms, two of which I'll show here, that allow regional businesses to be able to engage expertise at the labs to help move things forward. One of them is the New Mexico Small Business Assistance Program. Another one is the Technology Readiness Initiative. Both of these are ways for you to be able to engage with both Los Alamos and Sandia, starting immediately. This is the Los Alamos contact for both of these programs. There are a series of other programs besides these two that also provide opportunities for businesses to be able to engage with the national labs and take advantage of some of the expertise that's been developed over decades of investment. And this is my last slide. This is bringing us back to the year-long assessment that I mentioned. It's called iWest. The goal of this is to build this stakeholder-based understanding of where this region can go to deploy rapidly, starting today with technologies and evolving to new technologies in the next 5 to 10 years. I've got contact information for both me and my colleague Rajesh Pawar at Los Alamos, that if you want to know more information about this, we really want to be able to engage broadly with stakeholders in this process. So if you have any interest at all, please feel free to reach out to us. The project is actually going to kick off with DOE next week from this coming Monday. So we're right at the beginning of this. We're going to go for about a year. Series of workshops and other opportunities to get information into the process. And another shout out to Alicia for everything that she's done, both for what we're doing today, what she's doing in the context of this initiative. She can be a great resource as well, understanding how you get engaged. With that, thanks very much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you guys very much for your attention all day. I mean, it's been incredible. For the first public meeting that I've been involved with in 15, 16 months, maybe a little rough around the edges, but really appreciate everyone coming together. We've had, the governor of the state of New Mexico, the president of the Jicarilla Apache Nation, representatives from the Navajo Nation and from local governments. We've had cabinet secretaries I think that the governor said first thing this morning that the majority of the cabinet has been here or is here. And so I just want to recognize the cabinet secretaries. Is there anything that you all would like to say or to just wrap things up or Secretary Jim Kenney from New Mexico Environment Department, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you for organizing this and inviting us and getting everybody together. Thank you to our wonderful hosts. This is a great place to be and great to get out of our bubbles and get back into meeting with people face to face. So this has been a great experience. As an engineer, I could not be more excited. I could not be more excited from this conversation. And I think this really launches us into a really great space. I do want to echo what the governor said, and that the cabinet is here because we are all focused on this. We are all focused on hydrogen, many other things. We never stopped during COVID working on climate goals, working on our decarbonization efforts, working on our methane focus, working on trying to bring and attract new businesses to the state of New Mexico. We never stopped doing that. We did that in addition to everything we had done. We were performing on COVID. So we're ready. We're here. All of us have our emails and cell phones readily available to you. If you need anything from us, by all means. The governor is serious when she said she wants this done yesterday. If you've ever worked for her, you would know that. But we are here, we're ready, and we're very excited to be part of the Hydrogen Initiative. We do believe that we need to be a leader in producing consumption and exports. So everything we talked about fits into one or more of those umbrellas. The last thing that I will say as a cabinet secretary, and I think I'll speak for my colleagues who are here as well, we hope that during the 30-day session, if you are a believer in hydrogen and we have an agenda moving forward in hydrogen, that we see you stand up in support of the governor's priorities, and that we're right there with each other. Our legislators, who are fantastic, also need this degree of education. They don't have time for it, so we need to help them be ready to move on hydrogen in the 30-day session. Because we are in competition with every other state. Jason, you said it really well. We are in competition, and we need to get ourselves in the leadership role that we all know we have and deserve. So thank you, and that's all from me.
Thank you very much. Secretary Joe Props, do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, just thank you so much. We are here, as Secretary said, as a team, and look forward to working with each and every one of you to make this happen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we've got Director Sandel is here as well. Anything that you'd like to say?
I echo it all.
And we've had the Secretary of Indian Affairs here this morning, and we've had the Secretary of Economic Development here this morning.
I think she's out working a deal.
And she's out working a deal. And that's what I like for our community, working deals. So on my behalf, just thank you all so much for coming together. Economic development inside of our community and springboarding our fossil fuel energy industry, it is an absolute passion. And to have the support of the governor's office, for cabinet, for you all to be here in one of the first public meetings that has occurred in many, many months is just a tremendous honor on behalf of our community. And thank you all for being here. The intent, the true intent, is for this group, the invitees that have been here, the presenters, the operators that are here, the cabinet secretaries, and our federal government and our state government, where there are tremendous resources that are getting ready to be spent on this topic, for us to work together as a group for this community and for this state to be ahead of the pack and to be a leader rather than a follower. And you all were chosen very specifically for that purpose. And so I just appreciate you very, very much for being here. Many people traveled many hundreds of miles to be here. And so just thank you. And thank you for staying for an extra 30 minutes. With that, we'll go ahead and close today, and we appreciate it.